Travelers of Reddit, where do you never want to go again? Saudi Arabia. My parents worked there when I was younger, and as a minor, I came along. We lived in a gated type of community with very high walls to shield the Arabs from our liberal lifestyles. Checkpoints everywhere to ensure that all women were accompanied by male relatives. Everything closed down several times a day for prayers. Constantly hearing that high-pitched yelling on speakers everywhere made me sick. We lived nearby some kind of area for public executions and other punishments. Seemed to be the highlight of their week. Nothing but sand, ultra-rude men, and women dressed like ghosts. Extremely hot. A neighbor's wife was whipped and tortured for driving a car around the block. Saudi is hell. Edit. This blew up a little. To clear up a few things, this was the late 80s, 89, 90 probably. I did not personally see any executions. We went to an American school. Most of it was great as a kid. I met a lot of friends for life, and although weird, it had some great moments. And I do have many good memories from our sheltered world. It was only later and after the woman driving incident that it became scary. That's when everything else fell into place with the checkpoints and why my mom had to dress up in a weird costume to cover her face. And there is a comma in there somewhere. The weather was hot. Hard to say if the women were. Story number 2. I wonder if Midwestern cities get together for parties or reunions. What are the conversations like? Do Chicago and Minneapolis and St. Paul and Indianapolis stand in a corner and roll their eyes whenever another city talks about its growing art scene or its economic stability? Do Cleveland and Cincinnati repeatedly snub Columbus in its constant talk about being the third sea city in Ohio? Do Ann Arbor, Madison, Bloomington, and Urbana-Champaign show up late, sip a microbrew, and then leave after 15 minutes because they have tickets to a show by a band that you've never heard of? Maybe Gary and Flint drink some Jaeger and decide to vent their frustrations by ganging up on East St. Louis, but also throwing some side shade at bigger but still crappy towns. Maybe they say things like, "Hey, St. Louis, Detroit's worried that he's worse than Bogota. Can you come over here and let him know what a true crap hole looks like? We'd help him, but we're nowhere near as crappy as you." Edit. How the hell did I forget that Ann Arbor is the alpha male of the Midwest college town clique? Add it to the mix. Edit number 2. My comment got a lot of attention and was gilded, thank you. I am happy that people enjoyed it. I like to reply to all comments. Spots like Reddit exist for conversation and dialogue, but I just can't do that with this post. I'm sorry about that. I also want to add that I truly do love the Midwest. It's not where I grew up or where my family lives. However, it is where I have chosen to live as an adult and where I have chosen to raise my children. Edit number 3. I've spent most of my day today daydreaming about new adventures for the Midwestern University Town Hip Squad. Ann Arbor is cool because it is on a first-name basis with this cool rapper guy. Detroit, the squad is constantly trying to ditch Bowling Green, Athens, and Carbondale, but doesn't want to be rude. East Lansing and West Lafayette have their own squad and are very proud about the many times they've made Bloomington and Ann Arbor cry. I might come back here and add some of these adventures. Okay, so I'm reading this early in the morning. Maybe my brain isn't working right, but what did I just read? Like, does this have any relevance to the title whatsoever? Like, I really don't know what OP's talking about. I know these are places. I know OP's in the Midwest, but like, what are they saying? I don't know. But also, I'd like to say I lied. I thought I was done on Undersparked, but I'm back. Anyway, let's continue. Story number 4. Congress Heights, D.C. I was in a group of about 15 to 20 well-to-do white kids visiting Washington, D.C. with our church when I was 18. Despite coming from a wealthy parish, our leaders sought to save money and had us stay in a church in Congress Heights, one of the worst areas in D.C. We walked from the metro to the church where we were staying around noon on our first day. Walked back to the metro to explore the city the same day at around 3 p.m. Nothing went wrong during the day, but I'd been to D.C. 4 times prior. I knew this was an incredibly rough area. Later that night, we walked back from the metro to the church at around 8:30 when it was already dark. Bad idea. We got jumped by about 9 to 12 thugs who managed to split our group into 2, sending some hiding in alleyways, others fighting the thugs, and some running for their lives for about 4 blocks. Knives, bats, and belts were all used on us, and the only way we escaped our attackers was by darting into a fire station. Needless to say, it was a rough night, having a knife put in my face, running for 4 blocks, having my friends being rushed to the hospital, hopping a fence, nearly getting slammed by incoming traffic, then being questioned by police until 1 a.m. the next morning. A few weeks later, police contacted our group and told us it was likely a coordinated attack based off of security camera footage. They believe they watched us during our 2 walks to and from the metro during the day and knew to expect us to come wandering back at night. Edit. I'd like to add that in the days after, the parishioners were extremely charitable, going out of their way to get food catered for us and rented a bunch of movies for us to watch for the remaining 3 days we stayed. An interesting side note, our chaperones tried to paint a soft picture of the neighborhood in the days following. Opposite of that, the priest, parishioners, and a lady who worked in the church's food bank spoke with us about how it's undeniably rough and not to get comfortable. Each Congress Heights resident who we spoke to either had been mugged themselves or knew individuals who were mugged and were fed up with the inaction by community officials. Edit number 2. So, how did my trip end? Well, we got a call from back home saying we had to cut our trip by a day. The day after the mugging, we stayed in. The day after, we went and saw tourist attractions, this time using rental cars to take us to metro stations. And the third day was our final day, and we took Ubers to the airport and flew home. However, despite the crap we had to go through, I met someone on that trip who became important in my life and has stuck with me through thick and thin ever since. Story number 5, Istanbul. I crossed a few big items off my bucket list. I got to see the Black Sea and the Bosphorus. I toured the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque, but overall, I really hated my time in Istanbul. I felt like I was being assaulted every time I went outside. You could just not escape the street hawkers and people constantly trying to hustle you and sell you stuff. Even if you get away from the tourist centers, you would still have restaurant owners coming out and following you. On 2 separate occasions while my wife and I were just trying to go for an evening walk, we had waiters physically hold up oversized menus and block the entire sidewalk and try to force us into their restaurant. When we took one of the ferry rides to the Black Sea, we figured we would have a few moments of calm, but salesmen jumped on the boat and just kept trying to sell you stuff out of a briefcase and wouldn't leave you alone. If you said no, they just shifted tactics and kept trying to sell you stuff, which made sightseeing and just enjoying the view impossible. Once we arrived, the assault just continued. We had lunch and couldn't walk because all the shop owners were hounding us and following us, to the point where we just went back to our original restaurant, ordered another appetizer, and spent the rest of our afternoon not going out because we were sick of dealing with people. If I could describe what Istanbul was like, it would be boorish, aggressive, and rude. And Ataturk Airport is one of the worst I visited. It's crowded, hot, and there is no place to sit. I will go out of my way to never visit Turkey again. Story number 6, the train from Lhasa, Tibet to Beijing, China. 50 hours, 57 minutes, and 19 seconds. The 5-foot hard sleeper designed for every Asian left my 6'1" frame hanging with only 18 inches of room between my chest and the top of the train. The train would not allow open windows as people chain smoked and hacked up phlegm, which one of the most ancient Chinese secrets told them to spit on the floors. I watched people dual fisting cigarettes in my cabin, eating ramen, comparing ringtones for hours. I had E. coli from eating a duck tongue on a bed of radishes. Later, I saw them washing the radishes in the gutter water next to the road. I incorrectly suspected the duck tongues, which are served cold and have a bone in them, for those interested. My only relief was staggering to the food car with little communication ability, ordering soup and a beer. The seaweed soup served cold and the beer hot. Tibet is one of the most life-changing places I've ever visited. Experiencing a night at 19,000 feet at Mount Everest Advanced Base Camp made it all worth the forthcoming suffering. But as I laid there for 2 days in that coffin lined with repurposed prison mattresses, I lost sight of the end, forgot about ever have boarded, and thought I must have done something pretty terrible in my life to be eternally damned to this train fueled by pain, anguish, and suffering, but primarily cigarette smoke. Would I do it again? Absolutely not. Would I recommend it? I would offer my verbatim experience. Would I stop you? Not a chance in hell. That is one of my many experiences I've had visiting 18 countries in 2 years, including Jordan, Honduras, and Norway, 225 miles north of the Arctic Circle for New Year's. I know this post is for people to describe the worst, and I would be let down if I was not topped by someone going to prison or a hospital, but I assure you that it comes with the best. Never let horror stories deter you. Travel. Story number 7. As much as I loved living in Japan, I would never come back alone. The amount of times I was followed, stalked, offered jobs, propositioned for sex by men really turned me off to solo traveling, and as a result, I never saw as much of the country as I wanted to. The amount of times I had to walk to a police box to get someone to leave me alone was ridiculous. At one point, I was stopped 3 times on the main street near Yokohama Station by 3 different men. It probably didn't help that I was short, Asian, and weak-looking. It also wasn't just me. My friend was once followed around supermarkets by this old man who offered her 10,000 yen to go home with them. What really F's with me is that it's so common that it's really not a big deal when it comes up in conversation. When hanging out with my Japanese friends, it happened to come up in conversation, and most of the girls were like, "Oh yeah, that's happened to me before," but the guys were like, "Oh really? I never thought it was such a problem." And then we quickly started talking about something else. That being said, Japan is incredible and a lot of fun with friends. I would go back in a heartbeat if I could see them again. Edit. I would just like to say that my experience doesn't mean that every small Asian woman will experience this in Japan. Additionally, I lived in the country as a student and was not just here on a holiday. Women get harassed in every country and every culture. I've experienced harassment in most countries I've traveled to, as well as in my own country. I will stand by my opinion that Japan was the country that I experienced this the most, though. Story number 8. After quickly browsing the comments and noticing a strong trend, I have to say, this is the reason why travel agencies still exist. My mom recently passed away, but she took 8 people, including myself, on an amazing, affordable, and unforgettable trip to Italy. We stayed in an incredible private villa in Tuscany, toured the small mountain villages and churches, stayed a night in Florence at a wonderful Airbnb that cost the equivalent of $100, and beat all the crowds to Il Duomo. We climbed to the top of Giotto's Tower and saw the entire city laid out below us. We also hit up Rome and again went on a guided tour of the Vatican Museum. I was rolling my eyes a little because our guide was kind of whiny and hustling us along, going, "No, stop, no pictures, hurry." But then we hit a massive set of doors and she turned around with a huge smile and said, "I've never been the first. I've done this 10 years and I've never been the first." And we were actually the first people to walk into the Sistine Chapel that day. And I generally have no appreciation for art, but I'm tearing up thinking about how I felt walking in there. Then followed that up with the best pizza in the world, literally at Bonci's Pizzeria. We had an amazing tour of the Roman Colosseum, including the underworks, the actual stage, and the uppermost level with in-depth history for like 3 hours. We accomplished all of this in 10 days and still had plenty of goof-off days for couples to split off and do their own thing, or just sit on the lawn of the villa and paint or read. No rushing, itinerary to meet, and no stress. We never would have managed half of it without Mom's experience with traveling and especially her personal advice about Italy. The list goes on, and I'll probably turn this into a sort of tribute to Mom on Facebook, but my point is, if you really aren't super crazy organized and are traveling somewhere new and once in a lifetime, spend a few extra dollars to have a professional make arrangements. Story number 9. Khajuraho, India. It's most famous for its intricately sculpted temples, some of which depict sexual acts. I traveled through India alone for months, and as an obviously foreign woman, I get the expected unwanted attention. But Khajuraho was different. It was non-stop harassment everywhere I went, and the men always became aggressive when I ignored or politely declined their advances. I was having such a horrible time that I decided to just go back to the hotel where a man in the lobby waited to have dinner with me, and I again declined. The lady at the desk must have given him my room number because he called my phone until I disconnected it, and then started pounding on my door and telling me to let him in. It was truly horrible. Edit. I've gotten so many responses to this comment, so I wanted to clarify that I had a wonderful time solo traveling in India. I met tons of lovely people and built some friendships that still last 4 years later. I'm from a culture where machismo is a prevalent thing and know how to stand my ground, ignore, or yell back. I learned some Hindi, by the way, and did this a few times where I deemed it necessary. I don't sweat at the small stuff. I also dressed very conservatively, like sweaters and long sleeves, and traveled with people I met in guest houses if I was going too far off the beaten path. This one day in Khajuraho was just a higher level of intensity than I'd experienced before. I wouldn't, however, let this prevent me from traveling to India again, since I had a very positive experience overall. Story number 10. Belize City. Belize was one of our stops for the cruise we were on. I always heard about how gorgeous Belize was, and I'm sure there are beautiful parts of Belize, but Belize City was an absolute crap hole. They pretty much dropped a majority of white US citizens and thought it would be okay to let us roam a city that was torn by local civil war. The city was full of armed military guards standing at street corners, and the city canals and streets were incredibly polluted. I live in Baltimore and have seen some bad neighborhoods, but Belize City seemed way worse than anything I've seen. Many stores had armed guards who would unlock the door to let you in, and once you were inside, they would lock the door behind you. We didn't experience any issues with the violence, but it was the strangest feeling getting stared down from every angle. We stayed for about an hour and then decided it was time to get the F out. As we were leaving, there were 3 people standing near the port. They looked at us and said, "Welcome to the real world." And once we got back to the ship, we strolled past the lobby. There may have been 4 or 5 employees working the customer service desk. Each employee had a deep line, and the chatter was all centered around angry complaints about dropping us off at Belize City. Needless to say, the same cruise line took Belize off their itinerary soon after. Story number 11. India. I am a very experienced traveler and have lived in undeveloped countries before, so I thought I was prepared. I was a fool. 1. Crowds. Even in the mountains, even in the forest, even in remote back alleys. 2. Roads, if you can call them that. Rivers of chaos is probably more accurate. Massive lines of rickshaws, tuk-tuks, vehicles, animals, and pedestrians. An unending death knell of honking, screaming, shoving, and crashing, all in a cloud of filthy dust and smog that gets into your hair, your eyes, and your throat. I coughed for 3 weeks after I left the country. There is no way out of the way, and there is nowhere to take a breather for a moment. It takes a lot of the pleasure out of the awesome street food, one of the best things about the country. I personally witnessed 6 accidents in my 1 month in India. Going virtually anywhere results in plunging into traffic. Of course, this might not be so bad if not for the 3, rudeness. Beyond rudeness, China and Korea have absolutely nothing on the pure nastiness that means going outside of a private residence in India. Shoving, being screamed at, cars driving directly at you because they want to use the place you're walking for a parking spot, then blaring their horn in your face, being grabbed, being cheated, very tied into what is possibly the world's worst 4, tout culture. You know when you go to a temple in Thailand and you get 5 to 8 people bugging you with scam tours, unwarranted advice, and then they ask you to pay for useless goods, etc.? Well, multiply them by 5 and ramp up the aggression by a factor of 10. There are dozens of them, and they are everywhere. On random streets, highways, outside banks, on buses, whenever they stop, they run up to you, shoving, grabbing, pressing their goods into your hands, demanding you to pay, harassing you so you will pay them to leave you alone, screaming in your face, following you, going to find their friends to harass you if you buy anything from them because you're an easy mark. Worse, almost every service provider not inside a professional business, which makes up less than 10% of the workforce in India, feel entitled to try to rip foreigners off. The worst is, they act so initially friendly, then flip a switch as soon as they smell money. It's creepy, and it's everywhere. That friendly security guard asking you where you're from and asking for a selfie, he's going to ask for money. Wandering through a village and some smiling farmers ask where you're going and give you directions, their smiles fall away like clockwork and they begin demanding money as soon as you thank them, becoming angry and shouting if you don't pay up. Particularly because of the 5 massively overdeveloped tourism industry that has obliterated the cultures and landscapes that they're ostensibly celebrating. Rampant animal abuse, but never of cows, environmental devastation, garbage, garbage, garbage everywhere, massive tourist lines, horrific traffic bringing the rudeness and congestion even into remote mountains and forests. Experiencing anything involves getting harassed, often groped by security, even to get on a subway, and then seeing that it's actually falling apart and has already been manicured for photo ops. To its credit, certain spots are very heavily policed by security to keep this from happening, but it's already happened to a massive extent. The islands of Thailand are in danger of being destroyed by tourism, but it's already happened in India. Of course, remote temples and ashrams where you can stay are an exception, islands of peace and serenity away from the crowds and the 6, crime. Besides the aforementioned touts and aggressive bargaining culture, there are pickpockets everywhere in the crowds. But that might actually be better than being alone in them at night, where you'll be seen even more as a mark. Of course, even if you were safe, you wouldn't want to walk in the dark because you'd step into the 7, garbage. So much garbage. In the forest, in the national parks, on the streets, on the roads, in the rivers, in fields. Much of it is burned, but even more is dumped. This is understandable because of the 8, lack of infrastructure. Even in nice hotels, even in the major cities, power outages, loss of hot water, and the internet going out are common. There's more, but I've said enough, I think. I should also offer a disclaimer here that I have tremendous respect for Indian history and culture, and I love my Indian friends. People who see you as a person and not a mark, they're extremely friendly and warm. I recognize these problems are caused by its pioneering transition to democracy and the difficulty of managing such a massive divided population. However, as a traveler, India was far and away the worst country I've ever visited. If you're interested in cultures similar to India's without as many of these issues, I recommend Nepal and Sri Lanka. They're beautiful, more preserved, and much more pleasant. Okay, so I know given the topic of this video that we're just going to most likely hear mostly negative things about these places, but like, damn, India, okay, I didn't know it was like that over there. I mean, I'm not hating on the place, but OP certainly cannot speak positive about it. But you know what? I will. My favorite Indian export is the movie 3 Idiots. Great movie. Anyway, next story. Story number 12, Marrakech. This is a good, bad one, so get comfortable. I'd been twice with male friends, but the third one went with a mixed crowd. We stayed together as a group through all of the holiday until the final day when the girls went out shopping in the markets on their own. Well, we found them an hour later crying and shaking. One of the market sellers had been really aggressive with them, pulling them into his shop and physically holding them there until they bought something. Then he pinned one girl against the wall trying to kiss her. He insisted it was part of his Berber tradition to kiss her, but eventually just settled to kiss her on the cheek while she repulsed. But It gets worse. We reported this to the tourist police and they went absolutely mad. They made us wait in the station while they found the market seller and dragged him out in front of us. The guy was crying buckets and collapsed onto the floor in front of us. He begged us to forgive him, but the police were behind us, grabbed our arms, and said, "This is a very, very bad man. We need you to tell us you want to prosecute him. Don't waste our time." We were really intimidated by this, especially as we don't speak French or Arabic, and the police were gripping onto us. We were genuinely scared they would hold our passports and stop us from going home. So then the police tell us this man is going to prison for 7 years for the crime, but we need to give a written statement. So we tell the full story to a man in an office, and he writes it out in Arabic. We can't read this, but he tells us his translation. It's completely wrong. According to the report, it was a serious essay and he pinned the girl down on the floor. We go back and forth trying to fix the statement for hours, but settling on the best we can do. They keep saying things like the details aren't important, and their details were things like he forced me on the floor and put his hands all over my body, which did not happen. They also took our passport details. Continuing, we now go to the main police station to report the crime. So they bundle us into a taxi, 6 people in the back seat, and we go to the main police station. It's an absolute crap hole. It looks like a massive derelict factory that was converted into a crack house. We get led to a room where the market seller is stood in a lineup with other men. He is still crying his eyes out and can barely stand, so the lineup is pretty pointless. There isn't any glass separating us. He literally stood in front of us in the same room, which is really distressing for the girl that reported this. He's begging us to make this stop, but we're too scared to say anything to the police. We have no idea where we are. The building is huge, trashed, empty, like 5 policemen. The toilets were flooded, and we don't know where we are. Way out of the city center, and it's getting late. We eventually tell the police we fly home tomorrow, and they get really annoyed. They say we need to be at the courts tomorrow to stand in front of this man and accuse him of a crime in front of a public audience. But we can't because we'll be on a flight at that time. It now looks like things will work out. They say the man cannot be prosecuted without the victim coming forward, which is a relief to us as we no longer want this. Remember, we're stuck in a strict foreign country, not speaking the language and being pushed around by the police who are notoriously heavy-handed. They seemed fed up at the point and drive us back to our hotel in a riot van. We fly home and think it's all over. A month later, the doorbell rings. There's a Moroccan man stood right there. He tells us Hassan is still in prison and he needs our help. The man has traveled miles across the country, he's here on a work visa, to ask us for help. Apparently, the market seller's lawyer gave the family our home address from the passport details so they could get us to go back to Marrakech and tell the courts Hassan is innocent. We don't know if this is a scam or if the man is armed or anything, so we tell him to write us a letter and we'll respond to only that. A few months pass by and nothing happens. Then the doorbell rings again, and this time there's a French woman stood there. She tells us how she's flown over from southern France as a friend of the family to beg us for help. Apparently, she used to live in our city and so is staying with friends nearby. We arranged to meet in a cafe the next day. Turns out this is all true. Really a very elaborate con. She shows us newspaper articles, the police report, and websites. We see a clipping from a whole page of the Marrakech Times, which describes the event as an SA. The lady tells us the other market sellers paid the police to put Hassan away because he was taking away their business. We don't know if this is true or not, but we refuse to go back to Marrakech and go in front of the courts because we still don't know for certain if this is a con or what might happen to us. We write a statement and get it signed by a local policeman as a witness. In our statement, we say he did grab that girl, but nothing else happened, and that the man is innocent. The French woman says that she knows Hassan and he would never grab at a woman, but obviously that isn't true. So the French woman leaves with our note and says she'll stay in contact to let us know he gets out okay. She never wrote back to us, and we still don't know what happened and how much of that was true. We certainly won't be going back to Marrakech and are left with bad memories. Story number 13, Beijing, worst effing city I've ever been to. 1, can't breathe the air. 2, can't drink the water. 3, full of knuckle-headed country bumpkins looking for work, which means they are rude as hell, all get out, utterly uneducated, and are way more hostile than your most stereotype of an American. And 4, everyone on the road, especially the cab drivers, will try to kill you. That last bit is no joke, by the way. I actually got into a fist fight with a cabbie for almost running me over while I was holding my infant son, while I was crossing in the zebra stripes, while I was crossing on a green. He just ran the light and came so close to me I had to step back. I kicked his car as he sped past, that's how close he was, and he slammed on his brakes and came out to yell. I yelled back. He punched me in the face. I'm still holding my infant son, by the way, and I effing throttled him one-handed. I kept trying to give my son to my wife while pummeling him, but she wouldn't have it because she knew if I had 2 free hands, I would have ripped his effing head off. When I finally got my senses, I realized I was going to be arrested in a communist communist dictatorship if I didn't stop. So I grabbed my wife, still holding onto my kid, and beat a hasty exit into the metro station. That town has the most miserable effing people on earth. F Beijing. That being said, Xi'an, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Macau were lovely. Something about Beijing, though, brings out the worst in the Chinese. Story number 14. Shun King Mansions in Hong Kong, Lower District, Kulan. I had no problems with Hong Kong itself. It's a great city, but we made the mistake of getting a 3-person hotel room in Chung King Mansions. 2 beds crammed into a tiny room, barely big enough to fit the 3 of us standing at once. The toilet and shower were the same room. The one window opened very slightly and showed the center open air shaft of the building, a slimy, grimy wall of filth with no visible effort of maintenance. Getting to our room was another nightmare in itself. The way to the elevator takes you past this bizarre bazaar full of people trying to sell things that may or may not have been stolen. I don't know for a fact or not. It just felt extremely uncomfortable and sketchy having these hawkers, I think that's what they're called, follow you around this labyrinth of shops just to find 2 elevators big enough for maybe 4 people squeezed tight. Then waiting in line for 10 minutes just to get on the elevator. It was a cultural experience for sure, but I'm fine to never experience that specific building ever again. Going out was almost as excruciating as coming in. This really forced us to stay out as much as possible and not come back to the room unless we had to. Story number 15. Paris. I was there for 3 days to get over jet lag before performing in England. Worst time ever. The architecture and sights were beautiful, but the people are the worst I've ever met traveling. Locals yelled at all my colleagues and I for taking up space and almost running over her children when we stepped off the sidewalk to take a photo. She yelled some profanities in front of a group of children and was very disrespectful, seeing as I was nowhere near her. Then when I ordered food in every restaurant, I tried to order in French as I'm from Canada and know basic conversational French. However, the accents and grammar are different than true French, so every time I spoke in their language, they acted insulted and responded in English. I always speak the language of the country I'm in. It's only respectful. Even if I'm butchering it, I always appreciate being taught the correct way. Side note, Spanish-speaking countries do this more, I've found, which really helps instead of dismissing me when I'm clearly struggling. As for street vendors, I've been to really rural parts of developing countries like Guatemala, where pickpocketing and in-your-face street sellers are expected. However, I found that people were not invasive or scamming tourists in places like Guatemala. Locals made their daily wage selling beautiful handmade pieces. In Paris, however, people in my travel group were pickpocketed on our first day and our second day. A colleague was put in a Chinese finger trap by a street scammer and was told she can't be released until she gives them money. They weren't even selling anything, just scamming vulnerable tourists. Overall, Paris was filled with rude people and smelled like cheap cigarettes. Story number 16. Karachi, Pakistan. I walk out of the airport and was waiting for my ride when this random guy in his 50s asks me if I'm an American. There was a half dozen other Pakistanis around who perked up when they heard that, so I was super grateful to say I was Canadian. Unfortunately, the guy's English wasn't great, and my Urdu is just words and phrases, so there was a bit of confusion, and he asked if I was an American again. This time, the other guys moved a little closer to hear the conversation, and my vigilance goes up a notch. I repeat slowly that I'm Canadian and try to ask where he's from in return. My driver finally shows up and translates for me, and suddenly everyone smiles and welcoming handshakes. My sweat wasn't entirely because of the heat. First time I traveled there for business, I stayed in just a regular hotel a few blocks from one of the main police stations. Sometime between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., I woke up to something loud that rattles the room. So I get down on the floor and sneak over to the window to peek outside when I hear several really loud popping noises from down the street. I figure out that it's gunfire. I never heard it in person before, and I get back down on the floor in case of stray bullets because the gunfire continues for a few minutes with individual shots and strings of automatic fire. I finally hear sirens and it stops. I found out the next day that the police station had been bombed, the evidence locker specifically, and there had been a gunfight in the street just 2 blocks from me. Welcome to Karachi. Second time I go there, it's because the supplier from the first time reneged on our deal and sent product that was already rotten. I make a deal with another supplier whose father is a high-ranking officer in the military and promises a good deal. Well, the container gets loaded. 30% deposit is paid by the Chinese buyers to my Pakistani supplier, and the container gets put on the ship. I send a copy of the bill of lading to the Chinese and wait for the 70% balance. And if anyone has done business with the Chinese, then you know that if there's a way to F you over, they'll find it or make a new way. The ship is about to leave Karachi and my Chinese buyers decide not to pay the 70% as is norm. My Pakistani supplier becomes worried about being cheated and starts to pressure me. 2 days later, and my Chinese buyers are still feeding me bullcrap about going to pay ASAP, and I'm looking like a blatant liar and a fool to the Pakistani suppliers. Then, I meet the colonel. I get a knock on my hotel door and see these 2 big Pakistani guys through my peephole. My supplier opens the door, they walk in, and behind them is my supplier's father, the colonel. He's a scary effing dude. Barely talks and straight to the point. Bad news for me because I got nothing to give him. Coincidentally, my visa just happened to expire that day, so the colonel graciously offers to take my passport and renew my visa so I don't run into legal troubles. I'm flipping out at this point because that's a Canadian passport and it's worth its weight in platinum internationally. Even better is when the colonel informs me that I will now be his guest in this hotel until my Chinese buyers send the 70% balance. I spent the next 4 days and nights in that room with someone there with me 24 hours a day. I barely slept, and when I got up, I'd see my hair on my pillow that had fallen out from the stress. My hair is back to cosmic perfection again, don't worry. So I started getting desperate, and I finally decided to fake a wire transfer for the 70% balance using Photoshop and keeping my laptop angled slightly away from the other guys the whole time. I swear I went down to the pixels and made it flawless because I figured I only had one chance at this. The ship was just a few days from reaching Hong Kong at this point, and once it reaches land, the Chinese would have absolutely tried to renegotiate the price and waited while the product sat in the Hong Kong sun and heat, losing value each hour. Or they could just bribe the security guards and empty the container in the night. Welcome to China. Anyways, I email a copy of the fake money transfer to my Pakistani supplier, but he's rightfully suspicious. I do my best to convince him and throw in the truth that I just want to go home to my newlywed young wife and safety. He agrees, and him and I and one of the colonel's men pack my suitcase and backpack and clear the hotel bill. My passport appears out of nowhere and we get in his car. The sun is setting and my flight leaves in less than 4 hours, so I'm getting super nervous and panicky. I'm sitting in the car thinking that I might just get away with this whole thing, and if I get back to Hong Kong, I'm going to cave my Chinese buyer's face in to relieve my stress. Then we pull into a Western Union and my stomach plummets. He checks the number and it doesn't come up. Tries again and still no luck. I tell him it's because of the time difference and that it's a Saturday. The Western Union clerk agrees with thank the cosmos, and he reluctantly leaves. The sun is now down, and there are almost no streetlights outside the core of Karachi, so we're driving out onto a dark desert highway with cool wind in my hair away from the city lights. I suddenly realize that they're going to kill me in the desert, and my body will never be found. I clutch my backpack with my laptop, passport, air ticket, and other essential items tighter and tighter, and resolve to effing sprint towards the airport as soon as the car stops at a traffic light, even if I have to leave my suitcase behind. Then I see it up ahead. Shangri-La, the airport. We start getting closer, and I tense up for that final dash to freedom and survival. Within 2 minutes, we were pulling up to the airport departure lane, and I got out feeling more than a little dumbstruck. I didn't relax until I touched down in Hong Kong, and I found out the next day that my Chinese buyers had been laughing at the danger that they put me in, knowing that they planned to F the deal anyways. I also found out that Kashif Ashraf, my supplier with the colonel father, was a good man and true Muslim who believed in the true old rules of hospitality, brotherhood, and compassion. He knew it was a fake money order and lied to his father to let me go home. I still feel I owe him to this day, and inshallah we can meet as friends again one day. Story number 17, Buea, Cameroon. Was having an awesome day with my mates, driving rented motorcycles into the mountains with no license. Great times. Then some policemen pull us over for failure to present yourself to an officer and throw my Cameroonian friend in jail, conveniently not willing to risk throwing me and the other white foreigners in jail. Jail was a 3x3 meter cell with about 10 people in it, some of whom had been there for over a month. Clearly a bribe was going to be necessary to fix this crap. Went to the commander's office to sort it out. His office was full of hundreds of whiskey bottles strewn everywhere, and also a prostitute was in there with him. He informed me that he was off duty and I'd need to talk to a colleague at the bar next door. Went to the bar, found the guy, asked him what it would take to get my friend out. He said 10,000 CFA, about 10 GBP at the time. Told him we had a deal. He wanted me to give him the money in this dark corner where no one could see the exchange. I was thinking, F this. If I'm going to bribe this a-hole, I at least want all of his colleagues to know what is happening. And I insisted we exchange in a well-lit place in front of his colleagues. At this point, my Cameroonian friend was out of jail and standing next to us, and the cop says, "No, you were trying to disrespect me, the deal is off," and throws my friend back in jail and walks back to the bar. All of the above had taken so many hours. I was exhausted and needed to just GTFO out of there with my friends. So I went to the bar and asked the cop what it would take to get my friend out. He looks me straight in the eyes and says, "You disrespected me in front of my colleagues back there. There is a penalty for disrespecting an officer. The penalty is 2 beers. So I bought him his beers, gave him the 10 quid, and finally got my friend out of jail. It's a shame because the areas around Buea and Cameroon in general are beautiful, but you get a-holes like these corrupt cops bringing the place down and making the very few travelers who go there say, nope, not worth going back. First off, y'all, I just want to say I'm trying with these pronunciations, okay? They don't tell me, so I have to pause and look them up, but the video said Buea, so I'm going with what the video said. But also, one thing I suppose we can extrapolate from this story is that it's very easy to make an alcoholic happy because you always know what they want, don't you? Anyway, next story. Story number 18, New Delhi, India. Decided to go there in 2008. Never going back again. It's crowded, polluted, and everyone is trying to rip you off the moment they find out you are a foreigner. I am of Indian descent but Canadian. Even though I can fluently speak Hindi, I still speak it with a heavy accent, which can show you are not a native speaker. Suddenly, my prices to visit touristy places would go from 50 rupees to 500 rupees the moment I opened my mouth. I'd come to my hotel from traveling during the day and wash my face and see this black grime from all the pollution just spill all over the sink. There is also no such thing as crossing a street. No one gives an F. I basically had to fear for my life if I had to cross a street because the drivers are horrible and don't follow the rules. It's fine on major intersections, but smaller streets, you are effed. Oh, and the first and only time I was ever pickpocketed was on the Delhi Metro. As grand and well-planned and honestly beautiful as it was, the stations are all massive compared to the ones in Toronto, it was still a crap show to get onto a train. Lining up and waiting to get onto a train is not a concept that is popular there, and my well-mannered Canadian stupid self would politely let people in until there was no room for me. Also, the first time I ever threw up after drinking beer was also in the native country of my parents. Having safely ordered a Carlsberg, thinking it was brewed in Denmark, I got an upset stomach. Upon inquiring further, it was actually brewed locally with water that completely effed up my system. It's honestly crowded, hot as F, disordered, and messy. And F Indira Gandhi International Airport. Story number 19, Malta. My sister and I, from Germany, went there for a language holiday. I was around 14, she was 17. Originally planned to stay 3 weeks, but decided to leave after 2. Malta is basically a rock covered in moss and other depressing vegetation. It was 50 Celsius or 122 Fahrenheit during the days and still very hot at night. We stayed with a lovely host family, but they didn't have an AC, only a ceiling fan in our room, which didn't do much. I had a sunstroke after only a few days in, and my sister tells me I was talking nonsense during fever dreams at night. The food was mostly sandwiches, which I couldn't stand after a few days, thin white toast with old vegetables that made it soggy, and also the nausea from the sunstroke didn't help with my appetite. We had access to the beach of a private beach club as a part of our booking. The beach consisted of a tiered concrete terrace with garbage-covered rocks at the bottom where it met the water. There also weren't enough sunshades for all the deck chairs, and staying there without one was impossible. English lessons weren't great either, especially when ill, but it was nice to stay in the classroom because of its working AC. The public transport was very frustrating, timetables weren't exactly reliable, and waiting for buses in the glaring sun for half an hour wasn't very exciting. There were organized parties, but I had trouble enjoying myself and stayed at home when I could. So after 2 weeks of me being sick and my sister being worried sick, we decided to leave. The certificates that we got still said 3 weeks, so that's cool. Ultimately, I'm sure it was dumb of us to go in the summer. Even the Maltese said it was unusually hot, and I hear good things about Malta from other people, but to me and my sister, the place was a catastrophic failure on almost all accounts. Never again. Story number 20, Mumbai and other cities in India. I generally enjoy experiencing the cultures of other countries. Not much gives me culture shock anymore. India really did a number on me, and many of my friends have reported similar experiences. I have met many lovely Indian people, and I love Indian food. It's probably my favorite food, and I eat quite a bit of it living in New York City. I really don't mean to hate on India, but my experience sucked. I don't think I'd go back, even if the trip were free. 1. Many cities were ridiculously dirty. I've never gagged so many times walking around a new city. I obviously felt bad for the people who had to live in those conditions, but good God was it hard to enjoy myself. 2. Watching people cook your food and not wash their hands after leaving a restroom I know had no sink in it, especially when you know the custom that many people follow of wiping with one of their hands. It's not a fun experience. 3. If you're not a fan of crowds, being hassled, being yelled at, being grabbed, and generally total chaos, don't go to India. And 4. I'm a guy, thank God, but my girlfriend was grabbed multiple times on public transportation and on the street. She was catcalled half a dozen times per day, even when I was holding her hand or by her side. It was explained to us that this is pretty normal behavior. It made it incredibly difficult to enjoy ourselves as we felt like we were always on the lookout. This is not to say there were not plenty of experiences in places we did enjoy, but because of the above overall, our trip wasn't very positive. We wanted it to be so badly. India has so many beautiful experiences and places, but everything above puts quite the damper on the experience. Story number 21. Peshawar, Pakistan. Around 7 years ago, my family took a trip to Islamabad, Pakistan to visit relatives. After about 2 weeks, we planned a road trip to Afghanistan, also to visit family. This would require us to cross the border through one of many routes, and unfortunately, the route we selected passed through Peshawar. The road trip was quite an experience, and for the most part bearable. My siblings and I did not have high expectations whatsoever, and were fond of how impoverished these regions were, so we could tolerate most of it fine. In some parts of the mountainous portions of Afghanistan were beautiful. Upon entering Peshawar, though, it was as if all clean air just vanished instantly. You simply could not breathe properly here. The odor from outside was absolutely disgusting, and the region itself is incredibly hot. I quickly had to grab a towel to cover my face out of fear for my lungs disintegrating with every breath inhaled. Even then, it was absolutely intolerable. This region had absolutely nothing to offer. I can't imagine why someone would live there for more than a minute. Mosquitoes swarming around everywhere, no clean water, poor children climbing through trash piles in search of food, trucks carrying slaughtered animals and meat with blood pouring out of the sides as they drove. Not a single properly paved road will have you rocking left and right uncomfortably the entire drive with so much dust smacking your windshield, you're just praying not to accidentally collide with anything out of fear for remaining there for an extended period of time. This place was absolute hell, and we simply drove through it. I hope every person currently living there can overcome their financial obstacles and find a new place to reside because nobody deserves to step foot in that place. One of the worst places imaginable. Actually, we should consider deporting any horrendous criminals over there and leave them for simply 10 to 15 minutes to wander about. It's all they would need before quickly realizing how unappreciative they are and how good the opportunities available to them in a modern society are. Peshawar, Pakistan, worst place I've ever been, and I doubt I'll find somewhere else worse. Story number 22. Mumbai. When I've had a bad day, I often think to myself, at least I'm not in Mumbai. I was really looking forward to going to India as it had been to the top of my list of places that I wanted to go. There was thick smog everywhere. There were so many people living on the footpaths. I'm quite sure that most of the people I interacted with didn't have homes. Taxi drivers lived in their cars. Hotel security and concierges slept at their posts. There was crap and toxic pools everywhere. Tiny children holding tiny babies were everywhere, and a group of them spent every night outside the hotel I was at. Going out was really expensive because any alcohol was more expensive than London prices. When my conference ended, I went to a cheaper hotel. The cook was using the shower in my room when I arrived, and I saw a massive rat just before I went up the stairs in what looked like an abandoned building. I was there during the currency problems that they were having. I couldn't get money from ATMs very often, and when there was cash, it was only about £20 a day, which made everything a bit scary. Plus, every single vendor was trying to rip you off by giving back the defunct currency. I had to leave my crap hotel after one night because I didn't have any money to pay them. I went back to a slightly nicer hotel that had a card machine. I went to Aurangabad for a few days and saw some pretty cool things, but the pollution there was even worse. So, fellow viewers, what are you learning about India if you haven't already been there? I'm not hating on the place, but again, damn, India is taking a lot of L's in this video. I hate to say it, but it's just, these are their personal experiences. And smog. Anyway, next story. Story number 23. Definitely Bali. I read up before I arrived of exactly how to stay safe, how to stay well, how to not get scammed or robbed. I even read that if a Balinese or Indonesian asks you how many times you've been to Bali before, to say many times so they will think you are more street smart than you really are. And I figured, hey, I'm only here for 2 days, and one of those days is a wedding. What's the worst that can happen? After biting my fingernails for several days beforehand, because the nearby volcanoes were erupting and causing a week's worth of flights to be canceled, finally we got confirmation that our flight is still on. Great. So, I arrived at the Bali Denpasar airport and I had to pay $30 to enter the country. Annoying, I guess, but not a deal breaker. As I was leaving the airport, I had to run the gauntlet of people offering to wheel my bag for me, drive me somewhere, possibly drive me into the middle of nowhere and leave me for dead. I couldn't really hear over the cacophony of wannabe taxi drivers. I get to the hired car and we travel to the hotel. After the nightclubs in Bali were bombed in 2002, our hotel boasts anti-terrorism security that lifts the barrier arm for any vehicle that comes in. After checking in, dropping off our bags, and stupidly drinking the complimentary drink which has ice in it, we get back into the van to go to a restaurant suggested by the driver. He probably gets a kickback. The food was alright, but I can get cheaper and better Indonesian food in Australia. So we get back into the van afterwards and ask the driver where he can take us as it's starting to get to evening and we want to see something nice. He suggests a shopping mall. No, we want to see something nice, not a shopping center. How about the sandbar? He tells us it's too far and the sun will set before we arrive. We tell him to go anyway, and we arrive well before sunset. He was just being lazy. So we sit at the beach, and it's actually quite pleasant. Despite ordering a $10 bintang beer, and it comes in a bottle, I was expecting a pint for that price. When we get back to the hotel, I order room service, and we take the food to sit on the balcony. And within a few minutes, we are back inside because we're being attacked by mosquitoes. The next morning, we decide to go out for a walk. We can barely walk 20 meters without being accosted by somebody trying to give us something or encouraging us to get in their unlicensed taxi. I made the mistake of taking something offered to me, noticing that the hotel name on the brochure was different to the hotel name on the man's shirt. Anyway, I've taken this brochure package-looking thing and walked away, and the man shouts after me, and then comes riding along in his scooter trying to talk in Indonesian to me, so I give him his brochure back. No idea what was in the package, if anything, but I'm very glad I gave it back. We walk to a beach that would be nice if the sand wasn't obviously polluted, so we walk into town to look at the shops. It's a hot, humid day, more scammers trying to give us take rides, shop callers calling out, "Aussie, come in and look!" We do actually go into a shop, though. It has air conditioning, but it's not cool at all. I break out in a massive sweat as soon as I walk in because the air conditioner is only removing the humidity from the air. After only a few minutes, I'm massively dehydrated, and I feel like I'm in serious trouble. I have travel insurance, but the last thing I want to do is end off in the Bali emergency room, along with all the other Aussies who've been caught up in fights. Fortunately, the convenience store is only 50 meters away, so I struggle to walk there and we buy some water and sports drinks. I sit down and get as much into me as I can before we walk back, and presently I start to feel better. That was a close one. After a swim in the hotel's pool, we get ready for the wedding. The hired transport takes us there, past depressing shacks made of friable asbestos for a solid hour, to a really nice resort which has its own wedding chapel. It's stunning. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. It closed last year. But after several hours, the bus takes us back, and we have to endure an hour of one of the wedding guests being totally drunk and trying to rap. He's a white Australian. We pass by the drunk Aussie area, Kuta, on the way back. There's a gay club with no front wall, so we can actually see right inside. A nearly naked man is thrusting his hips on stage, and the words, "I love BJ," are projected on the screen behind him. How classy. And that's just what we wanted to see after a wedding. As the van winds its way through the streets of Kuta, we see Aussies getting drunk, swearing and behaving like total tools. I even apologized to the Indonesian driver for their behavior. We finally arrive back at the hotel, make our way through the lax security again, and go to bed. The next morning, my stomach feels like crap. I barely get any food into me because I feel like I'm about to vomit. Not a hangover. I stayed sober last night. It's food poisoning even though I was quite careful, and I curse my stupidity for drinking the complimentary welcoming drink at the hotel. My partner goes to the hotel reception to ask if they have any medicine, and they give her antacids. No, that's not going to do much. I try to check out of the hotel, but can't. I'm barely leaving the toilet by now. No way we are going to be able to take the van to Ubud to sightsee this morning. The hotel allows me to stay for another couple of hours in the room, and we stay in the transit lounge watching TV for a few more hours while waiting for the driver to come and take us to the airport to leave this hellhole. Fortunately, the transit lounge has heaps of toilets and free water. I needed both. The story doesn't quite end there, though. We, along with the bride and groom, went straight to Singapore. Because of the beating my stomach had taken, I was barely able to eat anything for the next few days, and the food in Singapore was good. My usually tiny appetite caused my partner to think that I hated Singapore and hated Asian food, and we had a big fight. I could show you some great photographs of us at Singapore's best tourist attractions, frowning. The bride and groom had a worse time. The bride got an inflamed intestine and had to go to the hospital, and by the time she was well enough to go outside without clutching her belly in pain, the honeymoon was over. I had never wanted to go to Bali, but leading up to the trip, I had started to become a bit more enthusiastic. Afterwards, though, I can say it was the worst holiday I had ever been on. I never want to go back. Story number 24. Effing Heathrow Airport. I'm never flying to London again. Long effing story. Fly from USA to Heathrow and I'm waiting for customs. Friend is taking me on a vacation because it's nearly my birthday and my favorite band is playing. I get called and show my passport, hotel, etc. Guy asks me what I'm doing there. I say vacation, the birthday trip, etc. Asks my plans. I say the few I can remember, frankly because I don't remember everything. It's my first time and I haven't memorized them. And I offer to show my itinerary. He declines. He decides I'm at risk for human trafficking and at one point suggests that I'm getting getting this trip because I'll be effing my friend. I show him the emails between my friend and I. There's no suggestion or hint of that anywhere. The guy then leads me into a hall, away from cameras, and he says to me, "You owe him. It's going to happen regardless if you say it isn't." And to clarify it, I think he means that either SA or that I'm lying. He suggests SA, but not really SA because this guy spent money on me. Therefore, I owe him? While I'm in holding, I ask the guards about the laws of consent in the UK and explain that the guard seemed to be advocating SA and I'm a little worried about my safety. Fast forward to interrogation, the guy raises his voice asking why I was asking about the laws. During holding, someone takes my luggage, by the way. He then asks about my missing luggage and wants to know what I had in it as they have just recovered it, and I list out medication, jeans, sweaters, books, tampons, pads, and of course, toiletries. He leans in to ask me, "Am I going to find any sexy underwear?" And I'm appalled and reply, "Yes, there are undergarments, but nothing extreme." When I inquire about my luggage, it turns out that they don't have it because it was sent to my hotel before they noticed it had arrived. When I'm returned to holding, the guard tells me to download WhatsApp so he can personally contact me about my luggage. He goes on to tell me it's fate that I wasn't allowed, and to thank God. I'm an atheist. The best part, the next time I should return with a husband. The complaints box in the building center was a suggestions box tacked to the wall that they didn't open till the next morning. The holding center had curry, fresh oranges, nice people, and a tea machine, but the shower was cold and low pressure. F you Heathrow. Story number 25. I was born around Mumbai but moved to North America when I was almost 5. I've been back a few times. I've also gone to tons of other countries, but India is by far the most tiresome for me. Hygiene is a pretty huge problem in much of India. If you are a germaphobe, you probably shouldn't go there. Homes are pretty clean, but all of a sudden, people don't seem to care about littering once they step outside of their homes. Traffic in India makes me feel misery like I've never felt before. All of this is further aggravated by the fact that I have grown to really like temperate climates and absolutely hate the humidity and high temperatures of a good portion of the country. Beyond that, there is also just general pollution and actual fear of potentially getting horrifically sick if you accidentally drink water or eat food from somewhere you really shouldn't have. Don't get me wrong, a lot about Indian culture and people is fascinating. Places like Kashmir are really beautiful. Sadly not that safe anymore though, but it's not some place I would want to go back to really. The people are generally pretty nice but seem oddly shallow to me in weird ways, but that's probably just cultural differences with what I've grown up with. It is true that most people have pretty backward notions about things like morality, marriage, and sex, which is pretty sad. So really quick, when OP mentioned North America at the start, did anyone else think we were finally going to get a United States story? Because I'm surprised we've gotten 25 in so far, and there hasn't been anything about some person's terrible experience in the States, or New Jersey, or Florida. I mean, for God's sakes, at the time of recording this, there is an alien invasion going on in New Jersey. It's aliens, you can't convince me otherwise. And yes, I know we're reading about some third world countries and places with disease or extreme poverty, but like, I feel like we're gonna get at least one story about one of the 50 states. And I would say it's not a case of if, but when. So I would implore you, consider which state or city are we going to read about as we continue throughout this video. My personal guess? New York City or Chicago. But anyway, next story. Story number 26. Poipet in Cambodia, border town with Thailand. I already knew it was going to be crappy, but thought I was prepared for it. Not quite. So, me and my girlfriend decided to take the train from Bangkok to Cambodia. Only downside would be the border at Poipet and getting a ride to Siem Reap from there. The train ride was beautiful, leaving very early in the morning, seeing Bangkok wake up, people cooking breakfast just a few meters from the tracks. Wind blowing in my face through the open window was very enjoyable after a few days in a hot and humid city. The changing countryside towards Cambodia was amazing. No problems getting a fairly priced tuk-tuk from the final train station all the way to the border. Exiting Thailand into no man's land, also not a problem. Loads of casinos, but only a few 100 meters walk to the Cambodian border, so no problem. We ordered our visa in advance, so we go through customs easily. Then it started. The minute you exit the customs office on the Cambodian side, you're swarmed by men trying to sell you a bus ride to Siem Reap. I know these bus rides didn't actually go all the way to the place, but to some bus depot outside of the city where you were forced to take a very overpriced taxi into the city. So we decided to stay the night in Poipet and try to get a fairly priced ride early in the morning. The hotel we're planning to stay in is just 1 kilometer away. So easy to walk to, no? Not really. My girlfriend is done with the heat and walking and wants a ride, so I have to find a tuk-tuk or a taxi because she refuses to take one of the many moped scooter taxis. Long story short, the following events unfold. Paying a shady guy on a scooter some money to find us a tuk-tuk. Tuk-tuk driver wants to take us to the bus station. Takes a lot of convincing to take us to the hotel instead. Right to the hotel in tuk-tuk, being followed by shady scooter guy who wants more money. Hotel staff almost gets in a fight with shady scooter guy to get him to F off. We get a really smelly room on the 4th floor, elevator's broken of course, stained sheets and neighbors who are having a gambling hooker party. But thankfully, we're off the street for now. But then around dinner time, the Poipet police, aka the bus taxi mafia, gather at our hotel for dinner. The very people we're trying to avoid getting scammed by. In the morning, we get into an unmarked cab for a fair price. He picks up some more people, all the while trying to avoid the cops. Transporting tourists without paying the police their cut can get him in serious trouble. But we arrive in Siem Reap safely, even though the driver almost fell asleep a few times. But yeah, Poipet is a hellhole. Stay away. Story number 27. Sort of a mixed bag for me, but Dublin, Ireland, and also Belfast, Northern Ireland. I don't want to discourage people from coming here necessarily. We have great bars and nightlife and extremely interesting history. Maybe I'm biased, but lots of people take an interest. I'm from Dublin, by the way. I've lived here my entire life. I grew up in my mother's family home in an area that used to be quiet, surrounded by farmland and in slow development. By the time I was born, it was one of the most crime-ridden parts of a city with a lot of crime. My next-door neighbors were notorious gangland criminals with dangerous fighting dogs which killed several pets in the area and mauled a teenage girl. We unfortunately had to leave because the council would do nothing about these people. Dublin is also known as the heroin capital of Europe for a reason. One good thing about here is that we have excellent bus services. But many mornings on my way into college, the people in the seats behind me are casually just effing shooting up at 9 a.m. Everywhere you go in the city center, there are junkies and addicts begging for money, generally being loud or threatening, fighting in public or passed out. Belfast, well, as I have an Irish accent, there are certain parts of Belfast that I'm genuinely not safe in. For those who don't know, as recently as the 70s and 80s, there was what was called the Troubles, where Catholics, usually ROI nationalists, and Protestants, Brits, or what are considered Brits by nationalists, basically warred with each other. The IRA carried out terrorist attacks here and in the UK, and the British Army basically did too, but since they were an official army, it was considered more legitimate. Catholic kids had to go to school in armored school buses if they traveled through a Protestant area, and vice versa. Now, things are supposedly settled, but there are still huge tensions all over Northern Ireland, especially Belfast. Going to the wrong area as an ROI person with Irish accent or British person with, say, English accent could get you attacked. My stepfather is English, and it made traveling up there pretty tense. The lady who ran the B&B we stayed in warned us away from certain areas and pubs. It was all a shame because I genuinely loved Belfast. It's a beautiful city with, again, a really interesting past. Story number 28. Pecos, Texas. The only reason we ended up there was because we hit an armadillo that blew out our tire. So we put the spare on and take a relatively cheap motel, and we come into town to wait till morning when the tire place opens up. My brother and I viewed 5 rooms before taking one. Now this alone should have told me to look for another motel, but whatever. The lady at the desk opens room number 1, and there has to be hundreds upon hundreds of flies everywhere in there. When I told her I wanted a different room, she was actually surprised. Go room number 2. She opens the door and there's a smell, a rank, unique, horrid, ungodly wet smell. I walked in, I walked out, I noped. What's behind door number 3? Actually, what's wrong with door number 3? Both locks, bolt and chain were broken and the handle wobbled so bad I thought it was gonna fall off. Next. Anyway, I eventually settled on a room which my bro and I share. Well, one of the beds turns out to be really dirty under the covers, so we share a bed. However, these covers have so many stains we don't even use them, just toss them in a corner. We are also a little freaked out from the locals. Some shady people live in this motel, as we witnessed pulling in. So we take every piece of furniture and barricade the door effing solid. And I'm glad we did. Laying there at 2 in the morning, wrapped in our hoodies, watching TV, we hear people walking around shouting. Someone starts banging on our door, then tries the handle. It's jiggling. They press their face against the window. Eventually they leave. This happens again a few hours later. Needless to say, we didn't get a wink of sleep. In the morning, we hit the tire shop. They fix our rim and tire good enough to drive on, and we get the F out of Dodge. These 2 nice Canadian boys will never go near Pecos, Texas again. That place should be bombed from orbit. Well, folks, it was Texas. Sorry, Chicago. Sorry, New York City. For me, mentally, Texas was on my list towards the middle, towards the top, like somewhere in that region of places that I thought we might hear about. But Texas was the first, it seems, all thanks to an armadillo. And it was so bad that you got 2 Canadians thinking that place should be bombed from orbit. Going off of the very nice Canadian stereotype, that is insane to me. They don't even have guns over there. They have muskets and single-shot pistols and say, "Righty-o, then I'll be taking that. Next story. Story number 30. I can think of a couple places I've come across that scream WTF, never again, how did I think that was a good idea? But even now, there's indelible, almost fond memories of them. One that stands out though, several years back, traveling on a kind of honeymoon trip with my now ex-wife, the whole trip was a compromise of sorts. A road trip through the western USA that included the Pacific Coast Highway, redwoods, the freaky deaky geology of the Southwest for me, and Disneyland and Vegas and malls and stuff for her. Just after a stellar trip through Northern California, Monterey Bay, and Big Sur, I had found us a campground that fit the bill for driving distance for the day. And bonus, according to whatever the guidebook I had, it was right on the ocean. So we get near San Luis Obispo and navigate our way through the bland suburbs and tried strip malls and ended up finding a parking lot with a sign that proclaimed it as a state park. I can't recall its name, but a search on Google Maps suggests it might have been Morro Strand State Campground. So I bumble in the loaded Subaru, a bit burnt out from a big day of driving, and immediately drive in through the outdoor right in front of a cop who was parked there with his window down. "Sir, you can't come in this way. Sir, where do you think you're going? You can't drive this way, sir." So I pull out my best Saskatchewan good old boy dialect and say, "Oh, is that right? Sorry about that, we're a little lost." Big all shucks smile I was putting on my face. At which point he completely warmed up, chatted a bit, and helpfully pointed us to the campsite, which was a damn paved parking lot. Literally, the tent sites advertised in whatever book we had were in actually a little gravel patch between the pavement and a chain link fence that was there to keep us from stumbling onto the tracks of a very busy commuter train line. And the place was jam-packed full. Huzzah for us. So we set up camp, eat some crappy hot dogs, and try to settle in while the multi-family group across the parking lot partied and hooted, and their loosely disciplined kids took their turns launching their electric razor scooters over the speed bumps in the parking lot. And then the train passed through, horn and all, about every hour or so all night long. Sometime just before settling in, I made my way to the prison-quality bathrooms for a wee and toothbrushing, and I decided, F it, let's go find this so-called Pacific Ocean. So I bravely wandered barefoot down a little path, stepped in some tar seeps along the way, California beaches represent, and had a great gander at the offshore oil rigs lit up like Christmas. And then witnessed one of the coolest natural phenomenons I'd ever seen, bioluminescence, and lots of it. Every breaking wave was glowing neon blue at its crest, each one seemingly more intense than the last. At first I thought the train and the scooter kids, or my ex, had finally driven me around the twist, but nope, there it is again and again. I've never seen anything like it before or since. I even convinced the wife to get out of her rage sack, sleeping bag, to come down to the beach and see. She was blown away too. If it weren't for the crappy campsite, loud train, louder campers, and oh yeah, the windowless box van parked next to us that fired up its poorly running 80s-era diesel V8 to warm up for half an hour at 4:30 a.m., if it weren't for all of that, I would have never seen glowing waves breaking on the beach. As Neil Peart once said, adventures suck when you're having them. Story number 31. I didn't see it below, but Vietnam. I'm sure it's just a personal experience, but I found it so unpleasant. Rubbish and filth, all kinds, everywhere. Everything felt half-assed and run down. Tons of homeless people, though homeless people and shed people with massive Rolls-Royce cars seemed to be a common thing. There was casual racism to outsiders. Zero animals or wildlife. I'm sure a lot of it is down to a history of war and invasion, so a cultural why bother to creating a space and creative architecture or something perhaps, but it wasn't for me. The one thing that sticks in my mind was visiting a night market in Hanoi and seeing a man selling bright rainbow-colored piles of rice. It was the first neat thing that I had seen, and I tried to take a picture, and the man just got up in my face and got aggressive. "You're selling dyed rice. What trade secrets am I, an obvious whitey, going to steal?" It was towards the end of the trip and just sealed my experience of people being horribly suspicious and tight-fisted. Either he genuinely thought I was going to steal his secret somehow with a photo from 10 feet away, or he didn't want me taking a photo without paying him money first. Another is visiting the center of Hanoi and their sacred lake. It's a national legend that when the Chinese invaded, a deity magical turtle appeared and gave a magical sword to their leader, who used it to beat back the Chinese. Now, the turtle did live in that lake, but the Hanoians dumped so much crap, literal and metaphorical, in the lake it became too toxic, and they had to move the turtle elsewhere because it nearly died. Vietnam actually nearly killed their real worshipped being by throwing rubbish in its home. For anyone who does go there, though, I definitely recommend visiting Saigon and Hanoi. The North and the South are like two separate countries, they're so different. The easiest visible difference is in coconuts. North Vietnam, you'll just see empty coconuts littering everywhere on the side of the roads, on the floor, in the gutter, in the lakes, and in rotting piles. In South Vietnam, you will see a pile of coconut husks drying, with a pile of coconut shells next to them, the meat all scooped out so they don't rot. It just seems to be a different mentality towards life. Story number 32. I'm very late to this, but last year I went to sunny beach, Bulgaria. That was an interesting place. The entire place is run by the mafia and everyone is corrupt. As soon as we landed, our baggage took over an hour to come off the plane. Turns out the luggage handlers are paid to take a conveniently timed smoke break so a bunch of thieves can come in and ransack every bag. This also happened on the way home and delayed takeoff. If you ever travel to Bulgaria, do not put any jewelry or cash in the hold. It will almost certainly be stolen. I lost 400 lev and my friend lost 900. Many people in our hotel had lost jewelry and other such valuables. Insurance did nothing as it was my fault for putting cash in the hold apparently. The local police are also on the mafia's payroll. They couldn't care less when we went to report the theft. We had to wait hours and hours for a translator and were then just ridiculed and told it was our own fault. Also, you have to pay a tax just to get a police report. We had to walk to the bank, pay the teller, and come back with a receipt just so that I could have a crime reference number to give my insurance. Story number 33. Carlsbad, New Mexico. That city was the worst. A guy at Whole Foods in Austin told me I should check out Carlsbad Caverns when I headed west on my road trip. I had never heard of them, so I said, what the hell, and made a detour. The thing is, they had an oil boom when I was there, so major oil companies had rented every hotel room. There were 4 guys to a room in the hotels, so they could charge $500 a night. I was about 50 miles outside of town when I looked up hotel rooms. I was like, that can't be right. I got to town and sure enough, ended up deciding I would sleep in the Walmart parking lot in my Mustang. Went inside for snacks. The store looked like a post-apocalyptic scene. This was discerning after every Walmart I have been into in my life was somewhat organized. Got my snacks and settled into sleep in the lot. Did it a few times on that trip, so it wasn't a big deal. But after the third car pulled up to me in the parking lot thinking I was the person they were supposed to sell meth to, I decided to go to a bar. At said bar, I met Vince. Vince was nice and hospitable, knowing I was just road tripping after college. He said if I needed somewhere to crash, I could come back to his place. He said it was a big 4-bedroom and it was just him and his wife. When we got there, I realized he meant he and his wife lived in the garage next to a 4-bedroom. Things got dicey when he asked me if I wanted to see his knife collection, but I did what any guest would do and said hell yes. Didn't get weird until I realized his wife walked out of the small bathroom at the back of the garage in a spaghetti strap with full makeup on at 3 a.m. And Vince said, honey, let's put on the good bedspread. Vince wanted me to bang his wife in front of him. Things got tense. I finished my warm Miller Lite and looked for an exit. As I showed myself out through the door with one of those shoe organizers hanging on the door full of ketchup, mustard, and all kinds of condiments, Vince followed persistently. Almost begged me to stay. I'm a people pleaser, but in this one instance, I elected to cut my losses. Always thankful to meet people when couch surfing, but cucking isn't my thing. Walmart 2 out of 10, knife collection 10 out of 10, lodging/cucking 1 out of 10, Carlsbad Caverns 10 out of 10. Would do it all again. Story number 34. Sharm El Sheikh, Egypt. Got a really cheap deal to it in 2011, and as my husband loves diving, it seemed like a good idea. By the end of day 2, I had lost count of the insect bites on my body. I had 40 below 1 knee. The resort lacked any kind of authentic culture. To walk into most places, you had to go through metal detectors and get searched. Most places had security guards with guns, and the hawkers were very intense. The Egyptian Revolution had just begun, so everything felt very on edge. As a girl, it's the only place I've ever been that I felt scared to be out on my own without my husband. I was followed and shouted out the one time I went out alone. Despite being dressed modestly, there seemed to be a real weird lack of local women. Oh, and both me and my husband got a gastro bug just in time for the flight back. Yay! That being said, the diving was spectacular. The sea life and reef are some of the best I've ever seen, and the people who worked in the dive school and our hotel were lovely, and I got to go quad biking through the desert, which was pretty cool. I would go back to do live board diving, but never want to spend any time on land in Sharm again. Story number 36. Barbados. Beautiful beaches, but horrible experience. We were on a cruise and decided to go look around the port. We were shopping and a local shop owner told my husband and I, do not trust anyone here. They will F you. And we were like, huh? With that in mind, we did decide to do our own excursion with help from the local taxi driver. Well, he made us wait an hour in the back of a van with no AC and 8 other people. The van was full, but he insisted that we could get 2 more. We could have gotten off, but we were in the way back and the people in front of us didn't speak English, so we were kind of stuck. He finally gave up and we left. He dropped us off at a famous beach, and as soon as we got there, we put our stuff down and some random guy came up to my husband. He told us not to leave our stuff because local thieves have kids run up and take our stuff. So we brought it with us to the shore. The same guy came up to us and tried to bribe us on getting onto a ship, which was nowhere to be seen. Wouldn't leave us alone, so we decided to move down. Comes time to leave, taxi driver never showed up, so we walked 7 miles back to our cruise ship dock. Other taxi drivers stopped, but they wanted $80 or even $100 when they were full with other riders. We said F it and walked back in 100-degree heat wearing nothing but our swimsuits, sandals, and towels. It was honestly probably the worst experience traveling. It's a beautiful place to see, but it seems everyone wants your money and doesn't genuinely want to help you. That, and there are emaciated dogs everywhere. I tried to feed one on our walk back and got yelled at for it. So who knows what's going on, but I will never go back there. Story number 36. As someone who loves traveling and wants to visit basically everywhere in the world, this thread is awfully depressing. But you are also getting everyone's worst case story in here, I suppose. The worst place I ever went to, though, was a sketchy liquor store in Queens, where I thought I was legitimately going to be killed or violently assaulted, but that's not really a travel destination, so Romania. I was close to Romania last Halloween and thought to myself, oh, Transylvania, I'm sure there'll be something cool or like a carnival or something of the sort, right? No, there isn't. There's a crappy Halloween party in Dracula's Castle, which is not Dracula's Castle, that consists of standing 2+ hours in line in the cold, a castle tour. The castle was so crowded that it was basically just standing in line for another 2 hours trying to get through the narrow paths. Nothing especially exciting to see, and still freezing cold. After the tour, you get a few drinks and then you can go to the party if you wish, which was actually not terrible, but it was in a tent below the castle. Not actually in the castle, and at least the tent was warm. Also, I was sick and had the craps the entire time I was in that region of Europe. Also, I had taken 3 trains to get there, one of which was overnight, and I was not given a seat, although half the train got off like 2 hours in, so I was able to snag one. Honestly, though, I'd still give Romania another chance. I went to Bucharest to sleep it off, and I was the only one staying at this hotel. The hotel was way out of the metro line in a huge apartment complex, but run by one of the nicest people I've ever met. Although, I basically just slept the entire time to get healthy. Plus, this is my worst travel experience, and I've been in a fair amount of places, so I feel pretty lucky with the SA and paralyzation stories on here. And it's one of those, it's funny to tell the story looking back on it, even if it sucked at the time, sort of deals. Also, Nassau is pretty crappy too. My friends did not want to do any of the off-cruise paid activities, so we just got off the boat. I took literally nothing with me besides the ID to get back on the ship and a few dollars in case I get mugged, and put the ID in my shoe. I was so paranoid. Probably 95 degrees with 95% humidity. It was basically the typical touristy scam stuff where the cruise ships dock, lots of people yell at you, and we walked a little further and bought some crappy souvenirs, and then my friends wanted to go back to the ship because it's getting too black now, as they said. Then I decided to start solo traveling. Story number 37, Cairo. I loved that I got to see it, but I never need to go back. The pollution was staggering. Some days we couldn't see 10 feet in front of us due to the smog on painfully hot days. My brother-in-law, mid-30s and in good shape, had to stay in the hotel some days as he had mild asthma and would basically suffocate in the city air. We were involved in 2 taxi accidents as the general driving conditions and streets are atrocious, and they have little to no driving rules. The water is so dirty you can't even brush your teeth with it, and we were in a 5-star hotel and they advised us only to shower with it. Also, many buildings are left unfinished due to a bizarre law that means tax is due when it's finished, so they just add another floor and leave that incomplete until a new owner takes it and has to do the same thing. Our prearranged guide tried to scam us, so did the hotel driver and front desk. Many of the people were absolutely lovely though, and especially so when we got out of Cairo to the other parts of Egypt. But in the whole, you had to watch for scammers the whole time in Cairo. The street sellers were the most aggressive I've ever witnessed, and one time where I didn't entertain it as I was sick of it and politely told them in Arabic we're not interested and to leave us alone, they got aggressive. Again, glad I got to see such a historic and vibrant city, but not somewhere I'm desperate to go back to. Story number 38. Lucknow, India. My friend and I were stupid and thought we could get to Pokhara in Nepal from Rishikesh, which is something like 600 kilometers away. That turned into a 3-day bullcrap fest, but whatever, that's another story. So we take our first train from Haridwar to Lucknow, got off, and then made our way to the bus station for our trip to Nepalganja, the town on the border. Saw a dead dog lying in the middle of the street, but it's early in the morning, so all the parts are still intact. In hindsight, that was an omen for the day to come. So we make it to the bus station, but the axle broke on our bus, so we have to wait until the evening bus. What to do in this city? We only assumed it would be a transit stop. I pull up a map on my phone to see how we can kill time, and behold, there's a lovely park nearby. We take a rickshaw to the park, but it's been repurposed into an open-air trash heap. Okay, whatever. We then go to the nearest sweet shop and buy some sweets and bottled water, playing cards to pass the time as we eat. But we're kicked out of the shop because our cards are Karma Sutra themed. Our bad. And rickshaw back to the bus station. See the same dead dog, only this time it's been torn to shreds because it's now around noon, and multiple cars, rickshaws, and cows have run it over. Around this time, we decide luck now really isn't for us. Now that we're back, we sit around the cantina in the bus station eating food and playing more cards. Locals trying to steal our bags at one point. We chase them off. Other locals beg for money. Same deal. Finally, we get on a bus and a bunch of men yell at us for about 10 minutes, apparently because a couple wants the seats that we're in. I don't know exactly why, I don't speak Hindi. So we got off this bus and it turns out to be the wrong one anyway, so that's good. Wait a few more hours, eat more at the cantina, play some more cards. Finally, we get on the right bus and make it out of the city. Never again. Story number 39. About a week before the Brussels airport bombing, I was in Paris for a study abroad. Part of my responsibility was to find out where our group should exchange US dollars for the local currency. Obviously, I picked the place that had the best exchange rate in the northern half of Paris. After a mildly sketchy exchange and being followed and stalked by a handful of harassing Parisians, we made it back onto the tram. When we returned to our hotel, we were asked how our trip/exchange went by the staff because we all seemed a bit weary of our first day in Paris. Turns out the area we were at was known for ISIS activity. Seeing as we were all predominantly white American college students, you could probably gauge how stupid we felt, especially me. We got a great exchange rate though, so really, I won't go back to that part of Paris again. Aside from our first day, the trip was fantastic. A few scary moments as none of us spoke French, but nonetheless fantastic. And also, for all of those who are curious, our study abroad trip was focused on comparing American Sign Language, ASL, with French Sign Language. Story number 40. Honestly, Thailand. Did 4.5 months in Southeast Asia, 1 month in Vietnam, 1.5 in Indonesia, and 2 separate 1-month stints in Thailand. Fell in love with a small island called Koh Tao in the Gulf of Thailand and really enjoyed my time there. However, the rest of Thailand was an effing slog. It is picturesque country, lush, diverse, eclectic, vibrant, and the food is delicious, but since tourism is such a major part of their economy, every single person is trying to get their piece at every turn. You sit down in a cab that would cost 100 baht at the meter. They will try to get you to agree to a rate 4 times as high or make up a bogus fee. Buying a bus ticket, you'll pay twice as much as a local. Getting change for just about anything? You better count it. People constantly waving you into their shops, heckling you to buy their wares, and visibly offended when you don't flash the cash or when you try to barter. It becomes tiresome after a while. And for anyone there for a short period of time, the positives will definitely outweigh the annoyances, but after a while there, I got tired of being treated like an effing dollar sign because I was white. Vietnam and Indonesia, I don't find it to be like this, by the way. Vietnamese were usually interested in why we were there and thought it was kind of cool. And Indonesia was big enough to have other things supporting their country, so people weren't as desperate around tourists. Story number 41. Might be late to the party, but here is my place I'd never want to go to again. China. Quite frankly, one of the worst countries I've ever lived in. I lived there for 2 years. I will, however, say that some of the people I've met there were generally really nice people, but they are few and far in between. The general population are completely uneducated and have absolutely no filter whatsoever, let alone their superiority complex issues in that society. I'm also going to mention everybody seems to lie, cheat, and steal in that country. Business, schools, and social love life, it really does not matter there. Not to mention they are incredibly racist and said the most disgusting things about other nations and how they warmonger towards specific countries. Most nations would agree if China went to war, they would lose horribly, but they honestly believe they have an overpowering edge over the US forces and our allies. Disclosure, I'm not from the US, by the way. China to me is just another North Korea, but without the threat of nuclear weapons. And yes, I know they have them, but they don't go on TV threatening to blow up the US and our allies. And China won't admit this, but they are a third world country, a developing country if you want to be super PC about it. And although they are the world's factory, all this money has done is given Chinese people an ability to travel and buy luxury goods, but they have no social abilities that the rest of first world understands. Story number 42. Munich Airport. I was there in transit, and we arrived early along with another international flight, full of Chinese tourists. This is relevant. We had to follow the long road through a few staircases and a corridor through to check-in area. This long corridor ended in a long escalator, which took us down to a large room where the counters were. I am about halfway down the escalator when I notice a commotion at the bottom. The people before us were so slow to get through the door leading to the check-in area that the people coming down the escalator had no space to get off. So everyone was pushing and shoving, and there appeared to be no sign of an emergency stop button. In the end, we avoided a major accident, although this was a totally unavoidable situation which was not managed by anyone. No airport staff around. Next, we had to line up in front of the available counters. There was about 10 of them and only 3 were staffed. So hundreds of people waiting to be processed, and it was taking forever because they were taking headshots and fingerprints of the Chinese tourists. I assume part of the immigration policy, depending on your passport. Plus, there were some language barriers, so a few translators were helping out. The room was big, but it was getting hot, and I started to feel faint. Too many people, even for an area that size. Meanwhile, there are airport staff walking around, not opening more counters, just watching, smirking to themselves like they were enjoying the chaos. Finally, after taking their sweet time, they opened a few more counters. It still took an hour and a half to get through that one line. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. Story number 43. East Hastings, Vancouver. I stayed in a hotel there for a week, thanks British Council who sent me there for being so damn cheap, and I did so back in 2010, 2011 sort of time period. It made me feel more sad than any. All the homeless people in Canada head to Vancouver because the winters are relatively mild, and then they all end up in East Hastings. It is the poorest neighborhood in Canada, and explains why the rest of Canada is so nice in comparison. All the bad is in a few blocks just outside central Vancouver. I am from Manchester in the UK, so I am used to seeing some poor areas, and I'm relatively streetwise. I know how to spot if somebody is likely carrying a gun or a knife. This district, though, pushed me to my limits a bit. There wasn't a single moment I wasn't making dealers and pimps looking after their territory when there. There were 2 moments that struck home how messed up it really was. One, an old woman saying to a girl who had all the hallmarks of a drug-addicted working girl, said behind me at a crossing, "Do you want to buy my blanket for $1?" And the girl replying, "I can't afford it." And then 2, the police museum is in the district, and they recommend you do not travel there on foot. Wow. It might be nice for the people of Montreal and Toronto to not have to think about homeless people quite so much, but that week was the moment I realized Canada really needed to sort its crap out. Story number 44. Manila, Philippines. I've been living in Manila for over a year now. I hate this city. The airport, a corrupt, decaying, badly designed hellhole, is just the beginning. Manila is an ugly concrete jungle that, to quote Claire Danes, smells like cockroaches. There is grinding, heartbreaking poverty everywhere, too. It's got the worst infrastructure and worst traffic congestion of any city I've ever visited, and I've been to 12 countries across Asia. Hey, have you ever wondered why you see Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, Thai, Korean, and Indian food restaurants in every city in the world, but rarely, if ever, Filipino restaurants? It's because Filipino food sucks. I apologize to all of my Filipino friends, but the food is freaking awful. Greasy, oily, unhealthy, flavorless crap. As Lonely Planet once described it, unimaginative and unrefined. Any non-Filipino who says they enjoy Filipino food, I'm looking at you, Anthony Bourdain, is just being polite. Want a decent meal? Prepare to pay through the nose. We're talking twice as expensive as a Western restaurant, and still be disappointed, no matter what the cuisine. I can count on one hand the amount of good restaurants here. What else? Fast food outlets and depressing strip malls full of American chains are everywhere. Sterile shopping malls are the only attractions. There are a handful of badly maintained museums. The historical quarter is a pile of bricks and a wall, which, surprise, is badly maintained, yet you still have to pay to see it. Classic Manila. Welcome to the crap show, and now pay me $5. And it's only getting worse each day. They're getting rid of Uber and Grab because corruption, so now I'm going to have to battle with dishonest, incompetent taxi drivers to get from A to B every day. Literally counting down the days until I can leave here and will never ever return. Manila does have decent nightlife if you know where to go. The rest of the country is nice, and Filipinos are wonderful people though. Truly beautiful women too. Manila sucks, Manila stinks, Manila has nothing to see, their food is abhorrent, but you know what? Their women are pretty hot. Next story. Story number 45. Tijuana, Mexico. A friend, myself, and her mother went to San Diego for spring break when we were seniors in high school. We decided to go to Tijuana on one of our last nights there. This was before you needed a passport to hop over the border. And oh, I forgot to mention that we went at the suggestion of this waiter that served served us earlier that day at this super fancy restaurant in La Jolla. My friend's mom, being the nut job that she is, invited the waiter to go with us. Who does that? So the four of us went to Tijuana that night. But long story short, her mother, who was still married to her father, who stayed back home by the way, was busted effing said waiter in the corner of a club. My drink was drugged and I was SA'd by a fellow American spring breaker that I had been chatting and dancing with all night, and my poor friend was stone cold sober and had to babysit the two of us. I have never been so effed up in my life. We left the waiter at the club and took a taxi back to the border. While at the checkpoint, my friend was questioned up and down, and we almost were not allowed back over the border because of how erratic her mother and I were. Once over the border, we spent hours looking for our rental car amongst a sea of cars in this huge parking lot. Her mother and I sat in the back seat while my friend berated us from the driver's seat while she drove us back to the hotel. I puked out one window while her mother puked out the other. The whole way back. We passed out on the floor just inside the door to our hotel room. The air was so thick the next day you could cut it with a knife. The girl and I are no longer friends, but to this day her father still has no idea what happened while the three of us went on a little girls' trip for spring break. It was the worst trip of my life. Not only do I think of that night when I think of Tijuana, but I remember how filthy the place was. The people were so scuzzy too. It was so bizarre. Granted, this was back in 2001, so perhaps it's changed, but I don't want to go back to find out. So, as many of you know, since I do all the narrations on Really Sparked for the most part, one thing that we do over there is read the comments, and I can guarantee you, if we read the comments of this story that we just heard, people would be asking, why have they not told the husband? What? She cheated on him. He should know that. Like, 3 people know, and nobody decided to tell the husband? I don't approve of that. I understand that the one is the wife, the other is the daughter, and OP being the third, but I still don't like the fact that the husband has gone this whole time and was not told that information. I don't like that. Anyway, next story. Story number 46. Poprad, Slovakia. My friend and I were backpacking around Central Eastern Europe and had spent 3 days in the Tatry Mountains and were on our way to Budapest. But we figured we would stop for a night in Poprad and possibly visit a castle nearby. Well, it was so crappy not even our Lonely Planet book could recommend a place to stay there. We booked a night through Hostel World, and when we got there, we were told to speak to someone in the restaurant next door because the owner of the hostel was away. This place was not a hostel. It was very evident that people had been living there for an extended period of time because there was a TV from the 1990s and a fridge full of moldy food. The place was absolutely disgusting. As young female travelers, we were terrified, so we locked our backpacks in a closet and found a nearby cafe. There, we booked a hostel last minute, retrieved our things, and made our way back to the train station where we exchanged our tickets to leave Budapest that evening. We also later witnessed 3 questionable men enter the hostel. Poprad was dead with nothing to do but serve as a halfway point to Budapest. Story number 47. Johannesburg, RSA. Flying in over the gold dumps, I was like, oh, hey, I guess we arrived at Getty Prime. Traffic from the airport to our hotel in Sandton was a nightmare. 2 hours to go 15 miles tops. The hotel was a fortress worthy of a Game of Thrones locale. The Saxon in Sandton, 20-foot walls, hard-pressing security outside, and a sense of isolation once inside. Damn nice hotel though, room was 200 square footish, but just nothing like the outside world. We had driven through Alexandria to get there, so when my wife suggested we do a tour of Soweto, I was like, yeah, we've seen that already, no thanks. And you couldn't walk anywhere to get anything. I needed a USB-C charger. The hotel was nice enough to send someone out to a mall to get one for me. Every street was walls. That was our first swing through though. On our second swing through, we had 10 hours to kill. So instead of hanging out at or Tambo, we took the GAW train down to Park Station to do the City Hopper tour. Well, the tour stopped running from there, but oh boy, did we get a slice of life. Never felt totally unsafe, but the area around there was just not in the I would like to walk this street area and hang out level of existence. Saw the Apartheid Museum, was quite interesting. Definitely saw some scary parallels between the Afrikaner elections in the 1930s and Trump's election this past year. Train got us back okay. Rosebank wasn't terrible, but yeah, never going through Joburg again. I've heard of Cape Town being less safe, but we walked the streets at night there in Bocap and went to bars and restaurants and never saw issues. And we were there for 3 nights. Story number 48. Rome. Unlike the rest of my trip through Europe, I got trapped in the most commercial and touristy parts of the city, so that may play a part in why I will never go back, but here goes. People dumping chamber pots out of second-story windows during the day on the busy streets. Keep in mind, this was 2006. The Colosseum was just a huge trash pit too. Locals brought bags of household trash and threw them in, knowing the city would remove it for free. Literal carpet of cigarette butts in every green space in the city. I can't honestly express how many cigarette butts were there. I'm a heavy smoker and I was disgusted. The cherry on top was when I held the door open for a woman and her grown husband tried to physically assault me before the restaurant workers stepped in and threw him out. Turns out, me holding the door for his lady emasculated him. I don't give a crap about cultural differences. A grown-ass man assaulting a 15-year-old child is unacceptable. I will never, ever return to Rome. Everything about the city turned me off forever. IMO, don't waste your time there. The rest of Italy is so beautiful, and the people so kind and friendly. Story number 49. Naples, Italy, the most congested city in Europe. And it looks like it. I've been all over Europe, lived in cities, so I'm pretty street smart, not overly brave, just paranoid. Everywhere we went in Naples, which was only part of a day, I felt like someone was stalking us. I was carrying a heavy camera bag, and we are obviously tourists, so it was impossible not to stick out in the crowd. Traffic rules are optional for drivers, so pay close attention if you're a pedestrian. No street signs anywhere I could find, and I wasn't keen to stand around trying to figure out a map. I have never been so glad to get out of a city before dark. There was this sense of impending doom once the sun went down. Despite it all though, we had some of the best pizza I've ever eaten a few blocks away from the train station. And fun story, we took the subway to the Herculaneum Museum, and I opted to wait and let the crowd fill out first to shake anyone who might be following us. I guess that was a dumb idea because these young guys were also dawdling, and when I saw how this was sorting out, I quickly made our way to the escalator. I don't think they were planning on mugging us. I think they were doing a drug deal in the station at the base of the escalator. There was no opposing platform, so we were truly alone. Story number 50. I see a lot of people saying India in this thread. I am a first-generation American with Indian parents, and I've been to India a lot. You definitely can't go with the mindset of a normal tourist. But this is for any third-world country. You have to be aware that if you look like a tourist, skin color, clothes, etc., then you will be bombarded with people asking you to buy stuff, ripping you off, etc. I would recommend finding a trustworthy resident there or a friend that knows how to navigate through wherever you are. My family is from North India, and I would have to agree that South India is more natural and beautiful. However, due to that, tourist spots are much more common and you won't really get to understand the culture. North India has many great spots too. New Delhi is just an F-load of people, and I wouldn't want to stay more than one day there. Women should be careful too, but that's true for everywhere. India is a wonderful and impressive place to visit, but you need to make sure that you come in with a prepared mindset. India is an extremely diverse place, and one visit would not do it justice. Well, would you look at that? The India saga continues with India finally getting a W in this video. I am so happy, India. Congratulations. I'm so very happy for you. That's the sound of me clapping. Don't get any dirty ideas. And you know what? India has been going to space recently, so that's cool. And then next, they will get rid of their smog, and it will be beautiful and delicious, and I will drink their water. Next story. Story number 51. Paris, France. On a personal level, every time I've been there, it's been a disaster. I got sunburn on my scalp first visit, second visit got my shoulders burnt, the gypsies at the Eiffel Tower scammed me, I discovered my then boyfriend was a complete a-hole and ended up fighting with him the whole trip, and getting lost on the metro. The underground metro is not easy to use and it is disgusting. Urine and vile smells everywhere, and some public service staff are incredibly rude and ignorant. Got harassed and followed for a short while, was quite frightened by a strange, aggressive young man speaking a language I didn't know on exiting this metro station with a female friend one evening. Also had a rubbish hotel which was very expensive, was on the 5th floor and lift had been broken for months with no apparent interest in being repaired. I hate Paris and would never go back. City of romance my ass. Story number 52. Peruvian here. Go to visit family every few months. The country has some beautiful places, but in Lima, the crime is so high. The cities, the towns, a lot of them beautiful, but many of them unsafe. I used to live there, know how to take care of myself. Windows up in the car at all times. I never took out my phone in public, but at least I blend in, sorta. Bright colored hair sometimes made it more obvious I was a foreigner, but I brought a friend from the US once with me, and everywhere we went, at least in my town, people were eyeing us up and down. There was once two guys who decided we were nice prey and started walking one in front of us, one behind, again eyeing our pockets. Thankfully, a family member who's lived there her entire life was with us and got us out of the way and warned us of it. We met a guy from the southern US in one of these stores that we were at one time, and he realized we were from there and told us a story of the multiple times he's had his pockets cut and how he'd been almost stabbed in the 10 years he was living there. Not too long before we met, a guy had put a knife to his throat to steal his cell phone, which was a very cheap flip phone, 2 blocks away from his house, and left a cut. Thankfully not deep, but still. And the stories from all the people I know that live there. They got robbed numerous times throughout the years, even in front of their houses. Story number 53. Long Island in the summertime. Put a hardcover book down on the table, watch it curl into a flying bird shape from the humidity right in front of your eyes. Enjoy a thunderstorm directly over your head while a sinus headache is trying to hammer its way out. When the thunderstorm stops, enjoy the sound of a passing train. You have to pay to park near the beach, you have to pay to sit on the beach, and your part of the beach is the nastiest, rockiest bit because some rich jerks own the parts with actual sand on them. And don't even think about going out for a walk in the shady woods instead. Lyme disease. Then there's Middletown, Connecticut. 50,000 people and no movie theater. The only 2 bookstores in the whole place sold college textbooks or adult content. The main drag was a freeway with a single pedestrian underpass, and there was no safe place to sit and watch the river. That was the reason the town even existed. There was an invisible wall between anybody black and anybody not black, a watchful expression if you nodded to the wrong person, sat on the wrong bench, or admired the wrong baby. The only place that sold fresh fruit within the walking distance of the campus wouldn't let you check it for bruises before you paid. Not going back there ever. Story number 54. Majorca, Spain. We were visiting family in Northern Ireland a couple of decades ago and decided to take a side trip last minute. We wavered between Spain and Greece. I really wanted Greece, but my husband's family all insisted we should do Spain instead, so that's what we did. Although the hotel staff was okay, the restaurants and shop workers were incredibly rude and definitely not the least inclined to be helpful even a tad. Food was ridiculously expensive, even in the grocery store. Everything catered to the British as far as food and drink. I had wanted to experience a different culture. I drank some sangria one night and got extremely ill, and it didn't go away. I was tested for hepatitis when I got home, and again 6 months later as I was still not quite right. I was negative, but there was definitely something that got me. My liver has often inflamed ever since. Besides that, it was the end of the season and it was cool and very rainy, though I can't fault Spain for that. We met some people at the Manchester airport on our way back home who had done the same thing we did but went to Greece instead. They had lovely tans because they had fantastic weather and said that the people were so friendly and hospitable and the food was amazing. I have been quite a few places and have never experienced rudeness to the level we did there. I have been better treated by enemies. I still can't believe that people would continue to recommend a place that treated people so badly. I regret to this day not going to Greece. I did have some good times there in spite of the lack of hospitality and getting sick. We are happy travelers, not the kind of people who sit and demand that people cater to us and entertain us. We got out to see and do different stuff and participate in games, etc. We actually won Best Couple at the hotel entertainment thing, so yay us. And I look forward to going back sometime and seeing more of Ireland and Europe, but Spain will not be included next time. Maybe not France either if they are as rude as their reputation suggests. Life is too short to put up with that crap. Story number 56. India. In 2 weeks, I managed to hit up most of the major cities for work. It was full of disappointments, especially the Taj Mahal. In Gurgaon, a suburb outside of Delhi, I saw a grown man peeing on the side of the road in broad daylight. This was outside of my 5-star hotel. In Chennai, I stayed at the Trident, and down the street, there were people living in abject poverty. In Vadodara, there were insects and lizards crawling all over the airport. It was barely an airport. Some guy was gargling water and spit it onto my legs right outside the Taj Mahal. For the most part, it was just a dirty place at best and disgusting at worst. People like to crap on China, but holy hell, India can be so much worse. Story number 57. New Zealand. Before you start flaming, listen to my story first. I was on a business trip with my CEO and CFO to New Zealand due to innovation from the Ministry of Energy for a press conference and signing of MOU for our company with the New Zealand government. We are scheduled to have a press conference between us and the New Zealand Energy Minister. Anyway, the worst part happens when we arrived in the airport. For some reason, all the passengers for my flights, Singapore, were pulled aside for a thorough inspection of luggage and body search. It was a very humiliating and super rude thing by the airport staff that attended to this search. My CEO tried to complain to the leader or supervisor of the staff but was ignored even though we were basically the guest of their government. For me personally, it was not too bad, but the way I saw how they treated the Thais and Vietnamese that was also on that flight was very rude and condescending. Since then, I have vowed that even with all the money that I have, that I will never go to New Zealand ever again. Worst airport staff in the whole world in my experience of worldwide travel. P.S. I have no problem with New Zealand people as they are all super nice. Story number 58. Went to Sichuan, Fuzhou, and cities of South Hong Kong in China. Never going there again, ever. There's spit on literally every inch of the sidewalks. All of them. All of them. Men, women, and children just spit willy-nilly. Got your shoes dirty because someone spit on them? Too bad. They won't even acknowledge you. They just move their head to the side, then spit. They don't even look at where it lands. And when I see literally, I mean literally. You're stepping on multiple spits with every step. And that's just before 2008 Beijing Olympics, when hygiene campaigns and police enforcing laws are at full effect. I'm avoiding China as a whole from then on. I'll go to Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Beijing in the future, but definitely not anywhere else in China. Story number 59, Greece. Spent almost 3 weeks in Greece, though definitely the touristic parts. Athens, Crete Islands, everyone was loud, rude, annoying, and constantly trying to scam me. Writing me a handwritten bill in Greek with the wrong amount at the bottom happened a dozen times. Giving me a drink, me asking if it was free, saying it was, and then it being added to the bill, basically every time. Lying about services offered daily. Went to a video gaming cafe, super common in Greece, and people yell spitting in my face because they just died in League of Legends, common. Loved the museums though, those were top notch. And then there's France. Yeah, it's really beautiful and has tons of history, but the people are pretty insufferable. In anything but the biggest cities, everything is closed on Sundays and Mondays. Basic items are incredibly expensive. Customer service essentially doesn't exist, and whatever form of transport you were planning to use is almost certainly on strike. Everyone is mean to you. Story number 60, Jamaica, or at least where I went. It was just kind of depressing, and the tour we went on was not very fun as the roads were narrow and surrounded by jungle, which was cool, don't get me wrong, but more importantly, the driving in Jamaica was madness. I am accustomed to driving in Texas. It's very flat. If my dog runs away, I can watch him for days. These roads were poorly maintained in design, curvy and shrouded, and all the drivers I observed drove in a way that would get you arrested anywhere else I have ever been. It was beautiful in the sense that it's a jungle island, but it is poor and just not what I expected. The only expectation that it lived up to was that I was offered weed essentially as soon as I left the tourist square. I'm sure it could have been fun had I done something else and the people were all nice, even the ones who weren't selling me something. It was just kind of sad and not really for me. I'd rather go to another island. Cozumel, for example, was nice. Story number 61, Flin Flon, Manitoba. I went for a run and burst into the trailing pond that the town is built around. Nothing but orange sand and red water surrounded by houses. Highest structure in Manitoba is in Flin Flon, and it's a giant smokestack. At 4 p.m., the ground rumbles due to blasting from the mine. Everyone is a racist cowboy or a broke native person. The Walmart has shut down nearly every independent business. Crime rate is extremely high, and gangs of natives will take you out if you aren't paying attention. Winters are bitterly cold, and it's on muskeg, which destroys the highways. I drove south from there, and it is the worst highway I have seen in a first world country. Summers are a mosquito holocaust due to said muskeg. It is such a freaking crap hole. And yes, I traveled there on purpose. No, I don't live there or anywhere even remotely close to there. I would hope it burns down, but I have lots of family there, and I actually like one or two of them. Story number 62, Laganas, Zakynthos Island, Greece. Me and my wife went there for our honeymoon. The island is very beautiful, and there is a lot to see and many places to swim, but man oh man, Laganas is a complete crap hole. Our hotel conveniently forgot to mention it's surrounded by these nightclubs that are loud as crap. But wait, there's more. Teens just turned 18 were everywhere and were always drunk and obnoxious, so no sleep for about 11 days. Food is crap too. The good restaurants are in their main city, Zante. And then these effing crap hole people trying to physically force you into their crappy souvenir shops or restaurants. And then the beach is completely littered with garbage. I'm writing this on our last day here and our flight is at 12 o'clock. I have never wanted to go home this badly. So, do yourself a favor. If you ever think about going to Laganas, shoot yourself in the head instead. You'll be better off. Story number 63. I can't think of any place that I've been where I'd never want to go again. The only thing I can think of is never doing what I did while on business trip in Dalian, China. I am F68, and I was staying at an in-fine hotel and decided to take the light rail near the hotel to downtown Dalian for the beer festival. I was having a blast at the festival and stayed there until closing, 10 p.m. I started my trek back to the light rail and noticed no trains were running. I mistakenly didn't check the light rail schedules as I had assumed they would at least run until midnight as they do in the US. So I flagged down a taxi that happened to be driving by the light rail station and handed the guy a business card from the hotel. He shook his head no, handed the card back to me, and drove off. I ended up walking about half a mile on the busy main roads towards the airport and eventually flagged down another taxi. This time I requested to be taken to the airport, which he gladly obliged. When I arrived at the airport, I paid the driver and then took a taxi from the airport to the hotel. The next day, I found out from one of the locals is that they, the taxi drivers, will only stay within Dalian as due to too many people not paying, getting to their destination, and then running off. Story number 64. Late to the party, but let's give it a try. In order of places I hated, worst to least worst. 1. Riyadh. Like a less interesting form of Dubai. More strict, hated/loved foreigners and a weird, we pay you to do our stuff so get it done, and we have some incompetent local managing you. 2. Lagos, Nigeria was a disaster. Nothing works. Traffic, meaning you travel for 6 hours a day to get anywhere. Power outages hourly, daily. People are never on time for appointments. Hot and humid. Expensive like you would never believe. $500 a night for a hotel, which should be $30. Lagos would have an amazing beach if it was not for the pollution, litter, sewerage, and gangsters. You could make it rival any beach in the world. I was almost late for my departing flight because 6 hours is not enough time to get through security and check-in. Story number 3. Egypt. The hotel was amazing, but outside malls and offices, not much going on. I had the impression that the pyramids were hated by the government and locals. Litter damage and lack of care for something so old and amazing broke my heart. And 4. Phuket, Bali. Overrun with Australian and Russian tourists who drink too much and push prices way up. Not outrageous, but definitely not right for their low quality. Then there's places I can't decide. Jakarta. It had literally the best hotel I had ever stayed in, but in the middle of a slum, surrounded by top-class marble, shopping centers, and restaurants. Traffic as bad as you have ever seen almost 24 hours a day, but the lower class and the upper class all mixed together in a crazy big mix. Interesting, but wow, not for me. Story number 65. Nevada, Missouri. On a road trip, and I just have the strongest need to pee. The next exit is the town above, and now I'm in a full car, but only me in the passenger seat and the driver are away. We pull off the interstate and look for a gas station. There isn't one, or literally anything but what looks like empty buildings. No lights, no street lights, no security lights, no light but the moon. On the sign, it said the town was 10,000, but here is where it gets weird. There is not a spot to open park. The street is lined with cars. As far as the eye can see, cars, but no people. No cars driving, no lights anywhere, but somehow packed. It felt like a zombie apocalypse. We find a parking lot for me to get out and rock a wicked 6-hour in-the-car piss, and still no people. The driver almost left because she got so weirded out. I had to yell at her to stop from just driving off. The weirder time I've had on the road. Would not recommend. Story number 66. This beautiful ancient village in Bali. We were getting ready for a bus tour to Ubud. 3-hour tour bus ride in traffic. Day before, I indulged in some seafood, bintang beer, and the local spices and herbs, sambal, and I gave the sambal the Frank's red hot sauce treatment. I put it on everything and had it for every meal. Anyways, after a horrendously painful bus ride, we arrived at this ancient village with a tourist center, ran to the pooper, and first thing I noticed was the squatting toilets. Next thing I noticed was the lack of toilet paper. Everything was brown, damp, and smelled of wet dog and wet poop. Third thing I noticed was the shower head in place of toilet paper. I had no choice but to wash off my irritated ass with ice-cold shower water. Last but not least, I noticed that there were no soap dispensers anywhere. My heart sank. My left hand had the appearance of being clean, however, a quick whiff proved otherwise. Long story short, my wife saved the day. She had a bottle of hand sanitizer in her purse. Story number 67. Wisconsin Dells / Lake Delton. The scenery is absolutely beautiful. Rock formations carved by floodwaters from an ancient glacial lake tower over the Wisconsin River, providing amazing sights from the boat tours. However, the thing that makes Wisconsin Dells a place I do not want to go to is the very thing that keeps the city alive: tourism. I believe tourism has ruined the area because the huge amount of tourists has caused uncountable resorts to be built in the area. And these resorts are huge. Most of the resorts are mostly water parks. Wisconsin Dells uses the slogan "Water Park Capital of the World." Some of the major resorts have extravagant features such as numerous roller coasters and even an indoor Ferris wheel. I'm not completely sure about this part, but someone told me that there was a small zoo in one of the resorts. I believe it's Kalahari. The main street of the Dells has also been ruined by tourism. Every store exists, tourists to cater to the huge amount of tourists that visit in the summer. There are a lot of tourists from Chicago that go there because it is the closest place with quality water parks. There are also countless billboards scattered throughout the area advertising for tourist venues. Wisconsin Dells and Lake Delton have no culture due to the huge amounts of tourists and the huge themed resorts. In my opinion, tourism has ruined the area. Story number 68. Does it count traveling to another state of the same country? If so, Rio de Janeiro. I know it's beautiful in the movies, but in real life, there is trash on the streets. People will try to take any advantage they can over you. It's hot 24/7, 365. Not to mention that it's dangerous as hell. On downtown, you are very likely to be robbed in daylight, even on the bus. I don't know about you guys, but I don't get comfortable with the possibility of getting shot at any moment by drug-addicted people. When I took a bus on Rio, all passengers would stay on the first half of the bus, and I didn't know why until I saw a lot of homeless people entering from the back door and using the last seats. Here in Brazil, most buses have two drivers, the front one to get in and the back one to leave the bus. When I went to the beach, a guy popped out of nowhere and insisted for like 20 minutes that I should buy his not even a bit suspicious snacks. Who doesn't want to buy Doritos from a translucent plastic bag? Also, people in Rio have to touch you when talking to you. Particularly, I hate this. I'm from the South. There's a lot of German culture in my state, so we don't keep touching each other when talking to them. I've even heard that some small cities teach kids German first and Portuguese second, and their accent irritates me. Story number 69. Of places I would absolutely never ever return to, I'd only say Dubai. An absolutely soulless place built entirely on literal slave labor. Aside from that, there are some places I don't have much desire to return to. Kenya is first. I think in general it's similar enough to Tanzania, but without some of the really amazing places Tanzania has, such as Kilimanjaro, Zanzibar, Highlands, etc. Also tends to be a bit more expensive and touristy than Tanzania, and less safe in general. I wouldn't say don't go there, but if I was going back to East Africa, I'd go for Tanzania over Kenya. Then there is Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea. I only went there to visit a family member who is working there, but it's really an empty city that has nothing to do. Papuan tourism industry is essentially non-existent, and while there are some beautiful beaches and resorts, although extremely expensive and hard to get into in the rest of the country, there is close to nothing to do in Moresby apart from go to the nature park, which is decent, I will admit, and the yacht club. There's not much in the way of special culture or cuisine in the city, despite PNG being one of the most diverse and naturally beautiful countries on earth. Gets boring after a day or two. Maybe in a few decades it will be different, though, as the country develops. And then there's Hong Kong, and I probably won't go back there either. There are just better Asian cities. It seemed very similar to Singapore, but dirtier and not quite as safe. I had a decent time there with my friends, but seemed like it would be very boring to go for more than the couple of days I was there. Story number 70. The Eiffel Tower. The whole waiting experience was 2 hours before we eventually decided to leave the queue and go find a restaurant before we lose our flights. That was one of the most unorganized places I have ever been, with 3 queues reaching 2,000 to 2,500 people under any weather conditions. In our case, 2 hours under the sun. The information provided by the authorities that run the place was non-existent to useless. Nobody in the queues had an actual estimation on how much one has to wait to get to the elevator to the top. Plus, while queuing, they constantly closed the doors to the normal queue to bring in more of the priority pre-book people, ending up for the last 40 minutes to have 2,000 plus people just watching elevators going up empty to bring people down. I trust we needed another good 2 to 3 hours, a total of 5 hours, to get up and down from the top. And for this kind of service, they will charge 17 euros, and I do not know how much more if someone pre-booked. Even the priority queues were having the same exact problems. Therefore, to not provide ETA to tourists shows the complete disrespect towards them. They just look like the tourists are sheep there. Not recommended. Never again unless they change their effed up system. Did something else in Paris instead. It is a big city. Story number 71. The Grand Canyon. Huge drive out of the way to one destination. Line of cars to wait with, even in April on a weekday. Then, it's a big-ass canyon. I mean, it's impressive, but I've seen it in so many movies and pictures and whatever. It was no more impressive in person. Would not do it again. And yes, I know tons of people love the Grand Canyon and or would like to go there. I'm sure they will love it, but I did not. And then also, Olive Garden. The first time, it was unflavorful. The second time, I got sick afterwards. Vowed to never go again. But then I was in a bridal party, and that's where the dinner was happening. Food was as unmemorable as ever, but I do remember the server who dumped all of the waters for our table on me and me alone. The whole tray. It was not getting a sprinkle or even a light dousing. It was so much water. So this time, I mean it, I will not go back. I expect the kitchen might explode if I were to enter there again. In no city will I ever go to an Olive Garden. So, I suppose given the title of this video and the question posed, which is Travelers of Reddit, where do you never want to go to again? If you go far enough, then I guess you have traveled to Olive Garden. I can't believe OP put a freaking restaurant. I mean, look, I don't hate Olive Garden. I've been there 2-3 times. I think I got a pasta, but let's be honest. I was there for the breadsticks. I am weak for the breadsticks, okay? And most people are too because they're delicious. They're made of crack. They're amazing. But you know, I guess a restaurant constitutes as an answer. That in India. India and Olive Garden. Anyway, next story. Story number 72. I never want to travel anywhere with Blue Panorama Airlines ever again. Most poor airline experiences stem from bad luck. But with this airline, it's purely routine incompetence and deliberate deception. When we tried to check in, we were advised that it was airline policy to have your middle name on your ticket. The catch being that when you purchase the tickets, there is no field to add a middle name. So then after queuing to check in, you then need to queue in another line to update your ticket at a cost of 50 euros per guest. Then you queue again to check in. Of course, this farce delays the entire flight as anyone with a middle name has to go through this process. We finally board the plane, but by this point, we have missed the takeoff slot, so we spent an hour at the tarmac waiting to take off. Reading reviews online, it seems like this happens every time. Never again. Story number 73. Kenya. I spent a couple of weeks in a poor little village on the coast of Lane, Victoria some years back, volunteering at a school which was funded by a project at my old high school. Never again. Now, I'm not one to take prejudiced stances in most cases, but after getting to know the culture and society there, I'm sure as hell never going back. First of all, I found a culture with no long-term thinking like whatsoever. If a family received a goat from a Western charity organization, they would put it on a short leash, essentially starving it, before finally butchering it for a thin soup and asking for a new one. This, I thought, was such an arrogant and wasteful strategy. Rather than to actually take care of the goat, perhaps use the neighbor's goat to make babies, no, not in that way, or milk it and potentially grow a larger stock of animals to feed the entire village, they would simply throw away their charities and expect new ones. In addition to this, I found a very racist and prejudiced society. The children would constantly chase after us, yelling Mazungu, Mazungu. I was told it essentially meant wandering ghost, and would stand outside our windows at night looking in like we were some kind of attraction at a zoo. Now this I can partially understand. We were the only white people they'd probably ever seen, but coming from such a politically correct culture myself, I'm Swedish, we find it quite odd to be on the wrong side of racism. Lastly, I found a society where human and animal lives had very little value. Folks would use their families, pets, and close ones as stepping stones to gain an advantage over them. This even meant leaving their children to be SA'd and infected with HIV. Now, I can understand that there are different cultures and values in the world, and that I might just be a spoiled little first world brat complaining about a poor little village in Africa, but my main issue is simply that society are making so many mistakes that my own has made several hundred years ago, and being so naive that all I would want is to help, as so little organization could improve so many people's lives so much if they would only want the help and care to listen. Story number 74. Tennessee, or more specifically, Sparta. I got stopped by the police a few years ago while on a road trip from Boston to the Bonnaroo Music Festival. The cop pulled me over because I had a license plate frame. You know, the crappy black plastic ones that car dealerships all over the place install on every car they sell. Apparently, those are illegal in Tennessee, and are enough of a reason for a traffic stop. Going to Bonnaroo, of course, we had a ton of weed in the car. Cop also happened to have a drug canine in the car, and I ended up being charged with misdemeanor possession. And I almost got time in jail too, and almost had probation, where I would have had to find a way back to bum F Tennessee every month for a year to get drug tested. But luckily, things didn't work out that way, and I only got fined $1,000 and got 1 year of unsupervised probation. I was only 20 at the time, so honestly, I had no idea how any of the legal stuff worked. I was freaking the F out, and I just didn't want my parents to find out. I was a college engineering student with a good future, and that was threatened because of Tennessee's insane drug laws. My life was nearly ruined because of some freaking joints that I brought to smoke at a music festival. The cop who pulled us over was convinced that people at Bonnaroo were dying left and right because of the marijuanas. He acted like he was a hero for saving countless people's lives by keeping a few joints out of the festival. And apparently they pulled over a bunch of other people for similar bullcrap reasons. Met others in court who were subjected to the same crap. One guy was pulled over because the cop said it was illegal to drive with headlights on during the day. Another one was pulled over because the cop thought they didn't have their seatbelt on. I never intended to go back to Tennessee or anywhere in that armpit of the US. I still got to enjoy Bonnaroo, and it was still one of the best weekends of my life, despite the trouble with the police. However, I am not going to put a single extra cent back to the economy of that effed up redneck crap hole. Story number 75, Syria. My reason has nothing to do with the Civil War. This was around 2008 or 2009. I was in Lebanon on vacation up in the mountains, and Israel started bombing and took out the airport control tower. All flights have been canceled. We had to go through Syria in cars and catch flights out. Border security was horrible. They treated everyone like garbage and refused to process any passport that didn't have a $100 bill inside. They actually flat out asked for it. Hotels treated us like some sort of dirty beggars. Airport security treated us as if we were less than humans. Male officers insist on patting down females and refusing to get a female officer, refusing to provide water. It was summer and the airport either had no AC or it wasn't keeping up. It was humiliating. Story number 76, St. Lucia, Caribbean. We went on a family holiday and the place was so poverty-stricken it was unbelievable. The Caribbean is not like those cruise ship videos and flawless sand. It is full of poverty, shanty towns, and rip-off merchants. Most of the roads in St. Lucia are not looked after, so everywhere you drive is a bumpy ride. There are hardly any footpaths, so you are walking on a ditch next to the dirt track, while cars blaze past at 70 miles per hour. Outside, there is tons of poverty, kids begging, shanty towns, and the good old Jamaican buses. The whole society runs on cash and backhandlers. Dollar is king in St. Lucia. The weather was nice though, but as a tourist sightseeing location, it is terrible. If you want to lay on the beach all day getting drunk, this is your spot as the hotels are very good. Outside the hotels, it's basically a war zone. The poverty in the Caribbean is real and below the standards of its neighbors like Mexico and the South American nations. I don't think I will be visiting St. Lucia ever again. Story number 77, Beirut. Was there as a transit passenger. They told us when we arrived that there was no such thing as a transit passenger and lined us up against a wall with bullet holes opposite of a bunch of soldiers with guns. They then told us that there was a transit area, but they weren't going to let us through. The soldiers were incredibly power hungry and just laughed whenever we told them that we needed to get to our other flight. They then took our passports. After hours, we asked them how we were supposed to get to our flight next in an attempt to start solving the situation. And the soldiers said, "What I want you to do is sleep for 1 hour and stand up for 1 hour, and then sleep for 1 hour and then stand up for 1 hour." And he kept saying this and started laughing. We were taken to a room full of soldiers who had our passports. They interrogated and laughed at us. After sitting back by the wall with the bullet holes, a lady who looked like an airport official walked by. I asked her how we can get to the transit area and explained our situation. She seemed confused and then got angry. She went and grabbed our passports, scolded the soldiers, took us to the transit area and apologized. We got our flights eventually, thank God. And also, Mozambique was quite scary too. I nearly died of septicemia and was attacked by a gang of men with machetes, but I actually do want to go back there again. So I suspect that OP might have a death wish or some latent fetish that has been unsatiated, because usually when people attack you with machetes, you probably usually don't want to return to that place. So maybe it's one of the first two things, or maybe Mozambique is so beautiful that OP was like, you know what, it's worth it. I don't know. Something's going on in Mozambique apparently. And also, a lot of things are happening in India. I would like to apologize for our fans of India, because if you live there and you watch the Sparked videos, you guys were not represented well, it seems, today. Of course, that's not the whole country, but I mean, India got like 1 or 2 W's, I think, throughout the whole course of the video. I should have kept track of how many times India was brought up in this video. Again, I got nothing against India. I've never been there, but all of these Redditors have, and it wasn't good. But anyway, guys, we are at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a really good day, and